The Lissy family tragedy. What drove a devoted family man to the brink? How can one identify a psychopath? Let's delve into what this term encompasses. Psychopathy is a personality disorder marked by distinctive traits such as a lack of empathy and compassion, emotional shallowness, egocentrism, and a deceitful charm. While not an exhaustive list, these qualities are commonly observed in psychopaths. Such individuals are adept at adapting, skillfully manipulating those around them, and expertly concealing their true nature, often to the extent that even those closest to them may not recognize the potential danger. The Lissy family's story serves as a chilling reminder that someone perceived as a loving and close family member can suddenly morph into a remorseless perpetrator, sparing not even their own children. The man's behavior and his stated motives for committing such a heinous act were so alarming and shocking that they raised questions about his sanity. Yet, to everyone's astonishment, a psychiatric evaluation revealed that he was fully aware of his actions and had premeditated the horrific crime. This case shook Italy to its core, particularly the serene province of Mavisanti, where this tragedy unfolded, marking it as the most notorious crime in the small Milanese suburb's history. Now let's methodically unravel this story and attempt to trace the sequence of events that led to such a tragic conclusion. The tragedy in Mavisanti. In the early hours of Saturday, June 14, 2014, the quiet town of Mavisanti was awakened by the desperate cries of a man. Peering out their windows, residents saw their neighbor, 31-year-old Carlo Lissy, calling for help. He appeared frightened and disoriented, mumbling incoherently and pleading for someone to call the police. As people from nearby homes gathered, Carlo revealed that his entire family had been victimized by intruders who had broken into their home, while he had miraculously survived because he was out with friends at a local sports bar, watching the soccer match between Italy and England. He mentioned that everything seemed normal when he left his house earlier that night, but upon returning, he found his home in disarray and the lifeless bodies of his 38-year-old wife, Christina, their 5-year-old daughter, and their 1.5-year-old son. Neighbors immediately called the police and emergency medical services. While waiting for them to arrive, the operator asked Carlo to check if any of his family members had a pulse and to possibly start CPR if there were any signs of life. To this, he screamed that he wouldn't step inside his house again or touch the bodies. While his behavior could be attributed to shock, it was peculiar that he referred to his family members as bodies even before confirming their demise. Carlo's odd behavior didn't stop there. When police and medical personnel arrived and confirmed the deaths of his wife and children, he barely reacted. He attempted to cry, but only managed contorted facial expressions, with his eyes remaining dry and his face almost indifferent. He struggled to recall the sequence of his actions, gave conflicting statements, but claimed to have recorded the moment he discovered the bodies on his phone's camera. He believed the recording would prove his innocence, but it turned out to be one of the main pieces of evidence against him, among many others. This was the beginning of a high-profile case that was quickly solved. The robbery narrative, strongly advocated by Lissy, was dismissed within hours of the investigation, and he became the prime suspect. As the police uncovered more physical evidence at the scene of the crime and interacted further with Carlo, doubts about his mental health began to emerge. Who was Christina Lissy? Let's start this narrative by introducing its main characters. Christina Lissy, born Christina Omas, came into the world on September 17, 1975, in the small northern Italian town of Pavia, becoming the eldest child in her family. From a young age, she exhibited a strong-willed, independent, and highly ambitious nature, always marching to the beat of her own drum. She possessed leadership qualities and was constantly striving to excel in whatever she undertook, whether it was her schoolwork, performances in the drama club, or any day-to-day activities. Christina was someone who always had a wide circle of friends, thanks to her excellent organizational skills and the ability to lead. After finishing high school, she was accepted into a prestigious university in Milan and soon moved out of her parents' home to start an independent life. Despite this, she maintained a close relationship with her family, staying in constant touch, and her parents knew they could always rely on their eldest daughter. At the age of 19, while still attending university, Christina took a job at a branch of a major Italian insurance company located in Mavisanti. She quickly earned the respect of her superiors and colleagues, and her career was on a fast track to success. Upon graduation, she had a wide array of opportunities before her, but instead of moving to a big city, Olmos chose to stay closer to home in the countryside. By this time, she had already received a promotion at work and assumed a managerial position, becoming a leading specialist in the field of civil insurance. However, even as she grew into an adult and a successful woman, Christina never gave up her youthful passion for theater. She dedicated all her spare time to rehearsals and performing on stage, particularly enjoying musical productions due to her strong voice and impeccable musical ear. In Mavisanti, she had her admirers and was sometimes even recognized on the streets. Yet Christina's personal life didn't seem to fall into place as smoothly. She had many suitors and occasional romances, but most of the men she encountered seemed frivolous, unreliable, and unsuitable for a serious relationship or family life. She held on to the belief that she would eventually find her true love and achieve happiness. Carlo Lissy, the unassuming psychopath. Carlo Lissy entered the world in the fall of 1982 in the Italian commune of Casarano as the eldest of two sons in his family. The family patriarch held conservative views, was quite strict, and even harsh with his children. Carlo's younger brother quickly became the parents' darling, constantly pampered and protected, while they demanded unquestioning obedience, stellar academic performance, and high achievements from their firstborn. From childhood, Carlo strived to meet his parents' expectations, always acting as instructed. He excelled academically, participated in volleyball, a sport his father chose for him despite Carlo's passion for soccer, and never argued with his father, who often stated that his house operated solely on his rules. It was easy to upset or anger their father, who became terrifying when enraged, so Carlo made it a point never to contradict him, always enviously observing his father's and mother's more affectionate treatment towards his younger brother. As a teenager, Carlo became nervous and withdrawn, dreaming of doing something on his own, yet fearing his father's wrath. His fears, internal struggles, and self-doubt affected his relationships with peers. Carlo had almost no friends at school, where he was seen as an uninteresting nerd, often openly bullied without the ability to defend himself, as his father had crushed his self-esteem and suppressed any desire to assert himself. Over time, Carlo learned to adapt and blend in. He avoided conflicts, tried to merge with the crowd, and was superficially polite and kind, even to those he despised. It seemed Carlo had lost his own emotions, or perhaps never had them, laughing or mourning with others, but his emotional responses always remained shallow because he never truly felt those emotions. Another trait of Carlo was his skill in dodging uncomfortable questions. He wasn't a pathological liar, but knew how to prevaricate and evade with such an impassive demeanor that it seemed he was speaking the truth. People who knew Carlo personally later recalled his diminished capacity for empathy. He could be described as callous and indifferent to the troubles and sorrows of others, including those close to him. After finishing school, Lissy enrolled in a prestigious university's economics faculty, chosen by his father, despite Carlo's disinterest in economics or working with numbers. But his opinion was never sought, and he couldn't challenge his father's decision. Thus, Carlo was accustomed to acting against his own interests just to meet others' expectations. Carlo was quite handsome and knew how to use it to his advantage. His youthful sports activities and regular gym visits in adulthood made him even more attractive. Coupled with some charm and superficial charisma, Carlo could be described as a real looker with a dazzling smile and athletic build. People often admired his looks, leading to excessive self-love and clinical narcissism. Lissy easily initiated flings with women, but was incapable of engaging in serious, long-term relationships. First, he tried to avoid any responsibility. Second, he had no interest in making long-term plans. simply going with the flow. And third, his partner soon realized he was emotionally shallow and devoid of real attachment, leading them often to initiate the breakup. Even after university, the young man continued living with his parents, showing no desire to start an independent life, let alone a family of his own. Meanwhile, he secured a job at a leading IT company in Milan. Carlo earned a good salary and faced broad prospects, but remained dissatisfied with his career. However, his parents were overjoyed, and his father seemed proud of his eldest son for the first time, so Carlo was too afraid to disappoint him, preferring to avoid conflicts and criticism. But soon, a good job and career achievements weren't enough. His parents increasingly pressured him to marry and provide them with grandchildren. Aware of his numerous fleeting affairs and his inability to maintain serious relationships, these discussions often led to arguments at home. As Carlo always tried to avoid confrontations, he assured them he would soon find a wife and start a family. Carlo and Christina Lissy, a love story. Carlo first laid eyes on Christina during her performance in a musical play on stage, where he was utterly captivated by her powerful charisma and stunning vocal talent. Despite his immediate fascination, he lacked the courage to approach her after the show. However, fate intervened a few weeks later when mutual friends introduced them. At the time of their meeting, Carlo was only 23, while Christina had already turned 30. Despite the significant age difference, they quickly developed a romantic relationship. Christina, who had previously focused mainly on her career, found herself unexpectedly wanting to build a family and have children with Carlo. He was handsome, career-oriented, and intelligent. Christina perceived his hesitancy, dependency, noticeable selfishness, and some emotional coldness as traits that could be mended. She took the initiative in their relationship, with Carlo compliantly following her lead. Just a few months into the relationship, Omas introduced Carlo to her family. Christina's parents, however, were not pleased with her choice. They saw her suitor as frivolous, with Christina's mother describing him as a child in a man's body. She believed her daughter needed a more emotionally mature partner who could be a reliable support, not this immature young man. Christina, however, disagreed and decided to follow her heart, as she always had. Conversely, Carlo's parents were thrilled with his choice. Christina was seen as an adult, wise, self-sufficient, and accomplished woman who could take care of herself and their indecisive, somewhat irresponsible son. The head of the family, who was not easily pleased, was particularly delighted, convincing Carlo further that he had made the right decision. In quiet waters. About a year after meeting, the young couple moved in together and started actively planning their wedding. Carlo was quiet and compliant, always listening to his fiancée, never contradicting her, and carefully avoiding domestic disputes. Christina made all the decisions while her chosen partner silently supported them. This arrangement suited her perfectly. She was confident that a long and happy life awaited them. However, just before their wedding, Carlo revealed his true nature for the first time, nearly causing them to split. Before the wedding, Carlo's friends threw him a bachelor party in one of Milan's popular nightclubs. They drank, had fun, and were having a great time when a group of women joined them. One of them showed a keen interest in the groom-to-be, trying her best to seduce him. His inebriated friends immediately egged him on, suggesting that a fleeting affair with the stranger would be the perfect adventure to bid farewell to his bachelor life. Without much thought, the guy went off to a hotel with the woman where they spent a passionate night. The next morning, unexpectedly, Carlo confessed his love to the casual lover and promised to leave his fiancée for her. That same day, he confessed everything to Christina, stating he had fallen for someone else and no longer wanted the wedding. Christina handled the news with dignity, packed her belongings, and decided to move back to her parents' house temporarily while finding her own place. But when Carlo's father learned about his son's actions and that the engagement with Christina was broken off by his initiative, he was furious. He declared he didn't want to see his heir until he apologized to the bride-to-be and convinced her to marry him again. Once again, Carlo submitted to his father's will. After buying a huge bouquet of flowers, he headed to the Omas residence. Christina's parents opposed him. They had disliked this peculiar young man even before the news of his infidelity and the broken engagement, and now they certainly didn't want to see him. But the final decision was Christina's to make. After some thought, she decided to forgive her fiancé and give him another chance. The wedding and Mr. Lissy's double life. The wedding took place as planned, and the money gifted by relatives was invested in buying their own home in Mavisanti. Initially, their marital life seemed quite blissful. Both held high-ranking positions with substantial salaries, affording them not just the necessities, but also travel, entertainment, and more. In 2009, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Julia, and in 2013, Christina gave birth to a son, Gabriel. To the outside world, they appeared as a happy family, full of love and understanding. Carlo seemed to do everything to please his wife, not out of deep love or respect, but rather to avoid disputes. Christina was content with their life together, oblivious to the double life her husband led. At home, he was the exemplary family man, spending time with his wife and kids. Yet in Milan, where Carlo commuted daily for work, he transformed entirely. He frequently engaged in flings and casual encounters, meeting women in cafes, shopping centers, or even on the street. The handsome, stylishly dressed man in his expensive car almost always received reciprocated interest, but these affairs typically ended after a few dates. Carlo enjoyed the control and dominance in these short-term relationships, deciding when to see his next conquest and when to leave her. At home, Christina held the reins, with Carlo merely following her lead. However, rumors of his escapades eventually reached Christina. Each time she confronted him, Carlo swore it was all lies and slander. In 2013, shortly after the birth of their second child, Carlo seriously considered leaving his family for one of his mistresses, to the point of admitting his intentions to his wife. Christina countered with compelling arguments against their separation, particularly highlighting how it would upset his parents. Carlo had no choice but to concede to her reasoning, new love, and a horrific plan to escape marital ties. A year later, in early 2014, a new employee named Maria, young and attractive, joined Carlo's workplace. He fell for her instantly, unable to think of anyone else. He tried everything to catch her attention, giving small gifts, complimenting her, and asking her out repeatedly. However, Maria was clear about not wanting to engage with a married co-worker who had 2 children, but Carlo, persistent in his pursuit, seemed to ignore her protests and didn't think of giving up. Moreover, Carlo began to blame his family for his unhappiness, believing his wife and children were obstacles to his personal joy. He convinced himself he had never been happy in his marriage, or in life for that matter. But with Maria, he imagined he could have the perfect relationship. If only he wasn't bound by his marital ties and responsibilities as a father. The more he dwelled on this thought, the darker his contemplations became. Carlo broached the subject of divorce again, but his wife once more convinced him it was a bad idea, and he found no arguments to counter hers. Frustrated, he started looking online for divorce lawyers, but realized after a few consultations that he would have to surrender half of his assets to Christina and also pay child support. Unwilling to accept such an outcome, he began researching how to end a person's life quickly and without arousing suspicion. Delving into various criminal stories, Carlo stumbled upon an article about an armed robbery that had occurred a few years prior in Mavisanti. The robbers had fatally stabbed the homeowner before fleeing with the loot, remaining undetected to this day. A monstrous plan took shape in Carlo's mind to recreate a similar robbery scenario, but this time the intended victims would be the mother and children. The last day of the Lissy family. The last day for Christina and the children was Friday, June 13th, 2014. Carlo had the day off and spent it with his family, giving them a farewell party, so to speak. They went to an amusement park together, then went to the mall for shopping, and spent the evening at a popular local cafe. The man did his best to make sure that as many people as possible saw him and his family that day, and everyone noticed how happy they were. After returning home, the couple put the children to bed in their rooms on the second floor and went downstairs to the living room where they made love. It was part of Carlo's cunning plan to avert suspicion. He knew that the examination would establish the fact that he and Christina had consensual intimacy, and who would think that after that a man would suddenly take the life of his wife and children? The woman knew that her husband was going to watch soccer with friends and assumed that he went to get dressed, and she herself settled down in the living room at the TV. But Carlo at that time went to the kitchen, where he took a large knife and stealthily crept up to his wife from behind. He stabbed her in the side of the neck, but Christina not only remained conscious, but also rushed to escape. Apparently, she did not immediately realize who had attacked her, and when she turned around and saw her distraught husband with a knife in his hand, she was shocked. The victim tried to defend herself and dislodged the knife, causing the man's hand to slip and injuring his palm. Despite her efforts, the strength disparity was too great. Carlo continued his assault until Christina showed no signs of life. She died without understanding why her loved one could commit such a horrific act. Then, Carlo went upstairs and cut the throats of his sleeping 5-year-old daughter and his 18-month-old son. Experts later concluded that the children likely did not suffer and probably didn't even wake up. Neighbors, some of whom heard loud screams, did not call the police, thinking the noise quickly subsided. Had they been more vigilant, the children's lives might have been saved. After completing the deed, Carlo clumsily staged a robbery, slightly moving and scattering items, erased his fingerprints from the weapon, cleaned the floor where he had stepped in fresh blood, and then went to a rarely used basement shower to wash off the blood. However, he inexplicably put back on the same underwear, which had small blood splatters unnoticed by him in the moment of the attack. Following this, the perpetrator bandaged his cut hand, dressed up, and casually went to a sports bar to watch football and drink beer with friends. He behaved naturally, and his friends, later testifying in court, could not fathom that he had just committed a triple homicide against his own family. Towards the end of the match, Carlo sent a couple of messages to his wife's phone, updating her on the score and professing his love, adding that he would be home soon. He returned around 3 a.m. and staged a dramatic discovery of the crime, making several critical mistakes. Firstly, he recorded the scene on his phone's camera, intending to create an alibi by pretending to discover the disorder and then the body of his wife, before running outside in panic. His second mistake was failing to turn off the camera, resulting in footage that completely contradicted his alibi and testimony, investigation, and evidence. Carlo's initial claim of a robbery was quickly dismissed in the early hours of the investigation, following the crime scene examination. Doors and windows were intact, indicating that the perpetrator had unrestricted access to the house. Nothing of value, nor anything at all, was missing despite money and Christina's jewelry box being in plain sight. The disorder appeared staged, with items merely toppled or displaced rather than searched through. Most importantly, there was no logical reason for robbers to harm the children sleeping upstairs in their beds. Thus, the case was swiftly reclassified as a deliberate act of ending lives. Carlo, becoming the prime suspect immediately, gave inconsistent statements and couldn't clearly explain the fresh cut on his palm. When he was taken into custody and his clothing was sent for analysis, experts quickly found tiny blood splatters on them. However, Carlo claimed the blood must have come from when he attempted to revive his family members, yet the stains were too small and located on the back of his clothing, suggesting they could only have originated from the knife's motion during the act. Regarding the video Carlo provided to the authorities, it clearly showed that he didn't approach his wife's body to check for a pulse or go upstairs to the children, but ran outside immediately and didn't return. Despite this, he claimed his family was no longer alive and knew for certain all three were ended with a knife. The discovery of a bloodied cloth in the trash, which the culprit used to clean up, was the final piece of damning evidence. A psychopath, but is he sane? After the man was arrested, all his attempts to feign grief ceased. He became calm and unconcerned, and once in his cell, he simply went to sleep. Carlo felt no guilt or remorse, no pity for his own children or his wife, but he continued to insist on his own innocence, despite the fact that all the evidence was against him. A search history had been reconstructed on the killer's seized laptop, giving the investigation an insight into exactly when Lissy began planning to kill his family. There was now no doubt that it was a premeditated crime, but as yet the motive remained unclear. When the man realized that there was no point in denying, he began to confess, telling how exactly he got rid of his loved ones. But the answer to the main question shocked everyone. Explaining the motives for his action, he said that he could not just divorce Christine, because then they would have to share a lot of jointly acquired property, including the house, cars, and the family bank account. And he was not satisfied with this. In addition, there would be a burden in the form of 2 children who would have to pay child support. And all this, according to Carlo, would interfere with their happy life with Maria, for which, in fact, he decided to commit a crime. About all this, the murderer spoke quite calmly and indifferently. That he is a psychopath, no one has no doubt, but it was unclear whether this man is sane. The psychiatric examination established that Lissy was aware of his actions and fully realized what he was doing, but he did not feel any remorse either at the time of the crime or afterwards. In January 2015, Carlo was sentenced to life in prison. He listened to the judge's verdict indifferently, noting only that he thought so. Sometime later, the man tried to file an appeal, but soon withdrew it himself, saying that it was all useless. Finally, Lissy's father died of a heart attack shortly after his son was convicted and sent to prison. He simply could not accept the fact that he had raised a real monster, devoid of a sense of pity and remorse. The teenage years are the most challenging of all the stages of growing up. Not a child anymore, but not yet an adult, this time can be characterized. The body undergoes a massive hormonal overhaul, further complicating this transitional period. Yesterday's obedient child becomes unstable and prone to rebellion. A teenager's worldview is a picture of contrasts consisting of black and white tones. The prevailing color in a teen's judgments and actions largely depends on their environment. The story we're about to discuss occurred in Medicine Hat, in the southeast of Alberta, Canada. Incomprehensible cruelty and betrayal befell the Richardson family. Their tragedy gained national attention, and once again, the Gothic subculture came under fire. In town, the Richardson family was considered exemplary. Deborah and Mark, along with their children, 8-year-old Tyler and 12-year-old Jasmine, lived in a beautiful and cozy place. Like all Canadians, they were very hospitable and sociable. Their home was often filled with guests, and the atmosphere was built on principles of love and respect. Everything was going well until the eldest daughter entered puberty. The once calm girl changed beyond recognition. First and foremost, Jasmine's character changed. She became bold and frivolous. Conflicts between her and her parents began to occur, and her academic performance dropped. Secondly, her preferences in music and clothing transformed. Whereas she previously enjoyed modern pop, she now took an interest in heavy rock. Bright colors and clothing were replaced by shades of gray and black, and her dressing style became provocative. Jasmine wanted to appeal to boys, so she began to emphasize her rounded shapes. Her interaction with former friends noticeably decreased. She began to spend more time alone in front of her computer screen. The door to her room was often closed. With the introduction of the internet at home, she became interested in Gothic themes, dark poetry, criminal psychology, and human anatomy. Miss Richardson even identified herself as a witch, preaching the Wiccan religion. For this purpose, she visited various websites of similar nature, where she found a circle of friends who shared her interests. "Welcome to my tragic world," was the greeting on her social media page. It seemed like a typical adolescence, spiced with excessive dramatism and mysticism. However, the girl became more and more detached from her family. In her profile, she listed a fictitious name and age of 15. She liked older interlocutors, wanting to match them. Her parents tried to support their daughter during this difficult period, suggesting spending time together. They looked for common ground, activities. However, she found this uninteresting. Jasmine considered her younger brother to be an annoying nuisance. Thus, she spoke to him less and less. Yet she could spend hours on end at the computer, talking to strangers. Deborah and Mark understood that this state was temporary. She would grow up, become wiser. Therefore, they were quite tolerant of her new hobbies. One day, Jasmine told them she would like to go to a concert of a punk rock band. Her parents agreed, if only they knew what this outing would lead to. Early 2006, Jasmine Richardson went to a concert of a local youth band, pursuing her own interests, knowing he would be there. Jeremy Steinke, the boy who had been stirring her heart for months, he too was fascinated by Gothic culture. They met on a vampire enthusiast's website, where they occasionally communicated. Jeremy portrayed himself as a 300-year-old werewolf thirsting for blood. To prove it, he wore a vial of blood around his neck, though it was unclear whether the fluid was of human or animal origin. Nonetheless, the boy clearly considered himself special, which Jasmine found very appealing. Meeting at the concert, the young people grew even fonder of each other. Eventually, Steinke asked her out, and she joyfully accepted. All would be fine, except Jeremy was 23 years old. The couple knew her parents would disapprove of their relationship, so they kept it a secret. Moreover, his troubled past would hardly endear him to them. The young man was poor and lived in a trailer with his mother and sister. His relationship with his mother was strained due to her excessive drinking. Jeremy had endured her constant stream of volatile partners who often beat him in their drunken rages. As a result, by the age of 13, he was struggling academically and had a fragile psyche. Once, unable to bear such a life, Steinke attempted to hang himself, but was fortunately stopped in time. Afterward, doctors diagnosed him with depression and hyperactivity. Bullied at school, he decided to stop attending. Over time, Jeremy fancied himself immortal and began frequenting websites of similar themes. His online profile was filled with topics like pain, self-harm, blood, and razor blades. No one knew about the couple's forbidden relationship except their friends, who found their love, to say the least, peculiar. Their communication would have remained a secret had the Richardsons not started monitoring their daughter's excessive internet use. Deborah and Mark discovered Jasmine was corresponding with strangers, alarming them as any parent would. Therefore, they decided to remove the computer from the girl's reach. Moreover, they were shocked to learn she had fallen for an adult man with dubious interests. His very nickname, Soul Eater, spoke volumes. Thus, Jasmine and Jeremy's relationship became forbidden. To help their daughter break free from this destructive relationship, Deborah and Mark sought a psychologist's help. They sincerely believed that counseling would benefit their parent-child relationship. To their delight, it did. Jasmine showed compliance and seemed to be returning to a normal life. Promising that it was all in the past, she got her computer back. This became the Richardsons' last fateful decision, leading to their demise. Saturday, April 22, 2006. Preparing for bed, Mrs. Richardson heard a noise in the basement. "Rats again," she thought. Descending, she turned on the light and saw a person in a ski mask. He stood opposite her, looking at her. Startled, she screamed. The stranger rushed at her, covering her mouth. His efforts were in vain. Deborah struggled and screamed louder. He stepped back, drew a knife, and stabbed her in the chest, then again and again. Hearing his wife's screams, Mark rushed down, grabbing the first thing he could find, a screwdriver. He had been fixing an outlet that day and by sheer chance left the tool out. Entering the basement, he was met with a horrific scene, his wife lying in a pool of blood and someone standing next to her. Mark immediately attacked the intruder but received a stab wound to the stomach, followed by more stabs. As the searing pain subsided and his eyes began to close, Mr. Richardson quietly asked, "Why?" "Because your daughter wished it," the attacker replied. Upstairs, Tyler was the only one left. The boy sat on his bed in his pajamas, too frightened to move. The approaching footsteps grew louder, and the bedroom door opened. A few days before the murder, Jasmine was overjoyed. Her parents believed in her remorse, meaning they could now communicate again. Mobile phones were just becoming popular at that time, so the computer remained the only means of communication. As soon as Miss Richardson regained internet access, she immediately wrote to Jeremy. "It all starts with them disappearing and ends with us staying together," she told him. During the days when the young lady was visiting the psychologist, a terrible plan had formed in her head. It solidified over several days of punishment. Surprisingly, Steinke found it enticing, but added that everything needed to be done creatively and with attention to detail. The couple understood that they could not be together as long as the Richardsons were alive. Later, Jasmine's friends recalled how often she spoke about her parents, particularly how much they annoyed her. Therefore, she wanted to end their lives. However, no one took Jasmine's words seriously. Saturday, April 22nd, 2006. Garrett headed across the street to his friend Tyler's house. The boy wanted to play. The weather was nice outside, despite being chilly. Such was the spring that year. When Garrett approached the house, he noticed the blinds were still closed. No one answered his knock on the door. Strange, he thought. The Richardsons should be home. Their car is parked in the driveway. Hoping to see someone, the child curiously peeked into the living room window but saw no one. Then, Garrett decided to walk around to the back of the basement, where he often played with Tyler. Peeking through the window, he saw something strange on the floor. It appeared to be two silhouettes in a pool of blood. The boy informed his mother. Skeptical, she decided to check on the family across the street. They approached the house together. Garrett pointed to the window he had looked through earlier. The woman looked in and recoiled in horror. She immediately called emergency services. Something happened at the Richardsons. They seemed to be lying in the basement floor, all in blood, the neighbor reported. The police arrived promptly. Breaking down the front door, they descended to where Garrett and his mother had seen something. Entering the dark basement, the officers had difficulty recognizing the people lying on the ground. Their bodies were mutilated and bloodied. But there was no doubt. It was Mark and Deborah Richardson, and they were deceased. Blood was everywhere, on the floor, walls, even the ceiling. A bloody mess. No other way to describe what was before them. Later, the police searched the house. In the upstairs children's room, they found a small child. The boy lay in bed among toys, splattered with blood with visible knife wounds. The child's throat had been deeply cut. Medicine Hat had never seen such horror. One officer said, "It will take me decades to forget what I saw today." After the house was searched, the police realized one family member was missing. The Richardsons' eldest daughter was gone. Officers worried she might be in danger. Everything indicated the attack occurred in the basement and the child's room. The rest of the house was undisturbed, and at first glance, nothing was missing. The state of the bodies suggested the crime occurred the previous night. Apparently, the perpetrator broke into the house and attacked the boy and his parents. Then what happened to Jasmine? And where was she? The police began to construct theories about what had happened. Perhaps by some stroke of luck, the girl was somewhere outside the home, safe. Or the perpetrator had abducted her and was now harming her. Or maybe a ransom demand from relatives would come with time. However, as time passed, there were no clear answers. Soon, detectives turned to the media, requesting help in the search for the missing girl. They hoped Jasmine would make contact or someone would provide valuable information. Meanwhile, the investigation into the crime continued. Investigators interviewed relatives, friends, and colleagues about all aspects of the slain family's life. Did they have any adversaries or enemies capable of such a heinous act? However, the more the investigation progressed, the clearer it became. There was no reason to wish death upon anyone in the Richardson family. They were truly wonderful people, faithful spouses and loving parents, except for the eldest daughter. Officers learned that the girl had been causing quite a bit of trouble lately. Therefore, the tone of media announcements changed. This time, the investigation wanted to locate a person of interest. It was entirely possible that the girl knew details about the crime, or she might have been involved in it. Considering the suspect's age, the media could no longer publish her real name, as per Canadian law. Thus, news agencies began to refer to Jasmine Richardson as JR. After it became known about her relationship with Jeremy Steinke, the couple was declared wanted. Initially, the search for the young lovers began among their friends and acquaintances, thinking they might be hiding out with them. However, this lead proved to be a dead end for the police, but they did uncover something intriguing. A few hours after the crime, the young couple was spotted at a restaurant and at a party hosted by an acquaintance. Someone from their circle of friends mentioned that Jasmine appeared unchanged. There was no indication she had been abducted or was in a state of shock. She was drinking and having fun. When friends asked how they managed to escape from her parents, Jasmine laughed. "Jeremy and I just took care of them." "Yes," the boy agreed. "I carved them up like fish." The party guests laughed, thinking it a grim joke, unaware that the statement was true. The involvement in the crime was also confirmed by a comic found in Jasmine's school locker, where she detailed how she would deal with each of her family members, with her boyfriend as her accomplice. Photos of the suspects were distributed widely. It was only a matter of time before a citizen would step forward with information about their whereabouts. Soon enough, information came in. The couple was spotted in the community of Leader, Saskatchewan, approximately 130 kilometers from Medicine Hat. Caught off guard, Jasmine Richardson and Jeremy Steinke were found sleeping peacefully in a pickup truck. Without resistance, they were taken to the police station. Naturally, the couple was interrogated separately, starting with Jasmine. She shared that she was deeply in love with Steinke, and he reciprocated her feelings. However, the difference in age and social status was a barrier between them. According to Jasmine, the Richardsons would never have accepted their relationship. Therefore, Jeremy committed the ultimate act of love. He ended her parents' lives, providing them the chance to be together. When detectives asked if Jasmine was involved in the crime, she said, "I wasn't home when the crimes occurred. I didn't know about what had happened. After I found out, I accepted it. I loved Jeremy very much, so I ran away with him." Detectives needed to determine who was the main instigator. Since breaking the suspects proved difficult, the investigation used a cunning strategy. They placed an informant in the cell with Jeremy, who skillfully extracted details that contradicted Jasmine's statements. Jeremy confessed to the informant that the plan to end her parents' lives was Jasmine's idea. Initially, he was not supportive, but agreed after they discovered the forbidden love and took away her computer. "I took care of Deborah and Mark Richardson, and Jasmine took care of her younger brother herself. She literally begged me to leave Tyler for her, though I was glad to settle scores with all of them," Jeremy cruelly revealed. After this confession, investigators confronted Miss Richardson with the recording. She had no choice but to confess to everything, admitting she stabbed her younger brother out of mercy, not wanting to leave him an orphan. Later, the couple shared their social media profiles and passwords with the investigation, which began to examine their correspondence. They had sent each other thousands of messages, confirming Jeremy's statements. Jasmine indeed conceived the plan on her own. Steinke wrote that Jasmine was the only person who supported and approved of his tastes, replacing the society he felt alienated from. Fearing he would lose her, he helped realize the dreadful idea. "I want to slit their throats. They will regret what they have done, especially when I make sure they're gone. They'll pay for the insults. Finally, there will be silence. Their blood will be the payment." Jeremy supported his beloved. His friends also reported that just a few hours before the attack, they watched the 1994 film Natural Born Killers, which portrays a couple committing 9 heinous murders. This story inspired their friend, who said he wanted to enact a similar plan with his girlfriend. "I think it's the best love story of all time," Steinke said. With sufficient evidence at hand, the suspects were charged with 3 counts of homicide. The detectives pieced together the confessions of the accused, witness testimonies, and other case evidence to form a clear picture of the crime. Before the act, Jeremy was intoxicated. Jasmine led him into the house and guided him to the basement, where he attacked her mother. Deborah was the first to die, suffering 12 stab wounds across her body. The deepest wound pierced her chest, reaching 12 centimeters deep and striking her heart. In a rage, Jeremy mercilessly continued his assault on Mark, who sustained 24 wounds, 9 of which were in the back. Like his wife, the family patriarch bled out on the basement floor. Tyler Richardson was the last to die. While Steinke was dealing with the parents downstairs, Jasmine inflicted 5 stab wounds on her younger brother upstairs. After Jeremy finished, he went upstairs to help his girlfriend with the child, coldly slashing the boy's throat as if carving a pumpkin. Afterward, Jeremy went home to wash off the blood, while Jasmine caught a taxi to a restaurant where the couple had agreed to meet. After discussing the night's events, they headed to a party. A friend of Jeremy's, Casey Lancaster, helped them dispose of the evidence and reach Saskatchewan. Words fail to describe the horror they created. The couple embarked on their murderous spree with such ease and nonchalance as if driven by some otherworldly force. It is shocking that during interrogations and their time in custody, not a word of regret or remorse was uttered for their actions. While detained, they wrote letters to each other, calling themselves legends and immortals. In one letter, Steinke proposed to Richardson, who joyfully accepted. Then, unexpectedly, their mad love began to fade like last year's snow. During the trial, they shifted the blame onto each other. In June 2007, Jasmine Richardson was the first to stand trial. She pleaded not guilty, claiming to have been in a zombie-like state and unable to act while Jeremy was killing her family. She also claimed she only wounded her younger brother, and it was Steinke who delivered the fatal blow. Jasmine insisted that their discussions about ending her parents' lives were purely hypothetical, but they appealed to Jeremy so much that he compelled her to turn them into reality. Under 3 counts of homicide, Miss Richardson was sentenced to just 10 years in prison, thanks to the nuances of Canadian juvenile criminal justice law, which states that individuals under 14 cannot be sentenced to more than 10 years of imprisonment. The sentence was aimed more at rehabilitating and restoring the girl's psyche than punishing her. In 2008, Jeremy Steinke's trial commenced. He insisted he had no initial intention of ending the lives of his girlfriend's parents. However, once discovered in the basement, he felt compelled to attack. He claimed he did not harm Tyler, suggesting Jasmine was responsible while he merely watched from the doorway. The defense argued that Jasmine had intentionally seduced him, wishing for him to free her from her parents' strict control. Some friends testified that Jeremy had sought their help with the act, driven by his fear of losing Jasmine to the extent of being willing to do anything. The lawyers also requested the charges be reduced to manslaughter, arguing Steinke was under the influence of substances at the time of the act. Steinke's inconsistencies emerged when, asked by the prosecution why he committed the act, he replied, "When you find your other half, you do whatever it takes for them." Throughout the trial, he remained indifferent to the proceedings, but broke down when Jacqueline May, his mother, testified in his defense. She admitted to bearing significant guilt for his upbringing, as he was often attacked by her partners, subjected to beatings and rejection. Steinke was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree homicide, receiving 3 life sentences. He would be eligible for parole no earlier than 25 years later, in 2033. Charges of complicity in the act against Casey Lancaster were dropped. In Medicine Hat Court, she was found guilty of obstruction of justice, sentenced to a year of house arrest, and prohibited from consuming drugs and alcohol. While in custody, Jeremy Steinke changed his name to Jackson May. Jasmine Richardson's 10-year sentence included 4 years in a psychiatric facility, where she was diagnosed with conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder, indicative of a refusal to follow rules and socially unacceptable behavior, typically more associated with children than adults. This underscored her psychological immaturity and instability during her relationship with Steinke. In her final years under conditional community supervision and attending special programs,
medical professionals reported her genuine remorse. After serving her full sentence, she was released in 2016. Currently, Jasmine Richardson lives in Canada under an assumed name. Her true identity still protected from media disclosure. Her return sparked significant public debate, with some arguing she deserved a second chance, while others believe she warranted a harsher penalty. Nonetheless, the residents of Medicine Hat would prefer not to have Miss Richardson as their neighbor again, given the brutality of her crime. Whether Jasmine has truly changed after spending her formative years in detention remains to be seen. Time will tell. The case of Kelsey Turner, how a Playboy model and single mother became a convicted criminal. Boundless greed, selfishness, and the pursuit of easy wealth often drive people to commit horrific acts and crimes. The story of Kelsey Turner, a former American model who appeared in popular men's magazines like McCrime and Playboy, serves as a stark example of this. The crime she committed with several accomplices shocked the public with its brutality, ruthlessness, and lack of logic. The young woman, who aspired to a life of beauty, carefree ease, and affluence, not only lost everything she had, but also ended up behind bars. In Turner's case, the most tragic aspect is that the victim of the bloody act orchestrated by the blonde was a well-known and respected psychiatrist, Dr. Thomas Burchard, renowned for his successful long-term practice and numerous scholarly works. He was also known for his boundless generosity. The doctor was involved in charity work, helping sick children and single mothers. His good deeds ultimately cost him his life. All the participants in these events stood trial and are now serving their sentences in correctional facilities. Let's go back a few years to understand how and why the elderly doctor, who dedicated his life to helping others, met his end. The downfall of Kelsey Turner, a model and single mother. Kelsey Nicole Turner, née Ingram, was born on March 5, 1993, in the port city of Norfolk, Virginia. She was the second child of Samantha Ingram, a would-be model and dancer, and Christopher Ingram, a simple laborer. Kelsey grew up alongside her older brother, Colin. Shortly after Kelsey's birth, the family moved to the small industrial town of Jonesboro, Arkansas, where she spent most of her childhood. A few years later, her parents divorced. Her father returned to Virginia and largely lost contact with his former wife and their children. Kelsey grew into a striking beauty with a perfect figure and model looks. School didn't interest her much. She was more into parties with friends, dating, and attending various events. She dreamed of fame, gracing magazine covers, giving interviews, and walking red carpets. However, Kelsey lacked any real talent. Her youth and good looks were her only assets. In high school, she began attending castings, hoping to become a model. Her mother, Samantha, who once aspired to be a model herself, enthusiastically supported her daughter's endeavors. Kelsey managed only a couple of shoots for clothing catalogs. At 18, Kelsey married Jerry Turner. She was already pregnant at their wedding and soon gave birth to a daughter, Beverly. Despite the arrival of their child, the marriage was short-lived, ending in divorce. By the age of 20, having given up on runway modeling, Kelsey decided to pursue a career as a men's magazine model. She created a portfolio with provocative photos and sent them to various publications, soon catching the attention of several men's magazines. Kelsey saw this as the beginning of a dazzling career and her ticket to the glamorous, carefree life she had always dreamed of. For a few years, she regularly received shooting offers. She eagerly gave interviews, attended events, and tried to make valuable connections. However, her career highlights were one-off shoots for Playboy and Maxim and a photo session, an interview for 110 magazine. She traveled to Los Angeles and Las Vegas for these opportunities. In an interview, Kelsey candidly described herself saying, "I'm a blonde with a busty figure and a slim waist. What more do you need for happiness?" She added that she loved partying, spending time with friends, and living it up because life is short, and it should be lived beautifully and joyfully. Kelsey wasn't overly concerned about the future, frequently changed lovers, and quickly spent any money she earned or received from admirers. At 23, Kelsey became pregnant again and gave birth to a son, Josh. The child's father didn't want to marry her or acknowledge his offspring. As modeling offers dwindled, Kelsey turned to social media to build an audience. She actively managed her accounts,
posting revealing photos in swimsuits, lingerie, or barely covering her intimate areas. To be fair, these images were heavily edited, making her resemble a Barbie doll. She also loved to share shots taken in fashionable boutiques, popular nightclubs, and other glamorous spots and entertainment venues. Kelsey's social media profiles created an illusion of a wealthy, successful, and carefree life. It seemed the beauty had everything and was simply enjoying life to the fullest. In reality, the single mother of 2 small children was struggling to make ends meet but never learned to manage her finances wisely, spending any money she received on the very day she got it. Around 2016, Kelsey faced serious issues after an unfortunate incident involving her daughter. The girl was physically unharmed, but severely traumatized and became withdrawn and mute. Therapy was recommended, along with sessions with renowned child psychiatrist Dr. Thomas Burchard, who practiced in Monterey, California. This fateful encounter led years later to a terrible tragedy. Who was Dr. Thomas Burchard? Dr. Thomas Kirk Burchard was born on February 16, 1948, in Boston, Massachusetts, to a family of a well-known architect and engineer. Later, his family moved to Virginia, where his father taught architecture at Harvard and the Architectural College at the Technological Institute. This is where the future psychiatrist spent his childhood and youth. Choosing not to follow in his father's footsteps, the young Thomas decided to pursue a career in medicine, specifically specializing in child psychology. After graduating from medical school and defending his thesis, he worked as a pediatric psychiatry resident in various renowned hospitals and lectured at colleges across the country. Eventually, Dr. Burchard was employed at a public clinical hospital on the Monterey Peninsula in California, where he worked for over 40 years as an incredibly sought-after pediatric psychiatrist. Dr. Burchard had an impeccable reputation. He easily connected with his young patients and took on even the most challenging and severe cases. He earned his doctorate from the University of California, Berkeley. According to Google Scholar, he had over 300 scientific publications, which were cited almost 40,000 times in total, and his Hirsch Index, a scientific productivity metric, was 81. Moreover, Dr. Thomas was known for being kind, responsive, and incredibly generous. His compassionate nature drove him to help those in need, particularly focusing on his young patients whose parents couldn't afford sessions. He also paid for hospital treatments for sick children from low-income families and assisted single mothers. Dr. Burchard lived for a long time with a woman named Judy Earp, who is variously described as his assistant and housekeeper, or as his lover and even fiancée. Regardless, she knew him better than anyone else and was the first to notice certain peculiarities in his behavior indicative of early signs of dementia or Alzheimer's disease. The elderly doctor, approaching his 70th birthday, became forgetful, absent-minded, and inattentive. He meticulously tried to hide this from his colleagues, constantly keeping diaries and notebooks where he recorded every detail, especially names, dates, and events, to avoid confusion. He always carried one of these notebooks in his breast pocket, containing his banking details, account numbers, passwords, and card pins. Another notable aspect of Burchard's behavior was that he, already a generous person, became very trusting, and the financial assistance he provided to those in need increased from hundreds to thousands of dollars. Dr. Thomas Burchard, a windfall for Kelsey Turner. When Kelsey first brought her daughter to Dr. Burchard's office, she lamented that she was raising 2 children alone and likely couldn't afford his costly services. To her surprise, the doctor offered to help her child for free, and after the appointment, gave the struggling single mother $300 for her children's needs. The blonde was astonished, but quickly realized that with tearful stories about her challenging life, she could extract more funds from the elderly man. At the next session, Kelsey, having prepared in advance, put on a whole performance, tearfully telling Dr. Burchard about her younger son's illness and lack of funds for expensive medications. This time, she boldly stated a fabricated amount and received it in full. Kelsey couldn't believe her luck. From then on, she regularly concocted tearful stories, extracting increasingly large sums of money from the trusting older man. Naturally, she spent the money not on her children, but on her own entertainment, designer clothes, as well as visits to cosmetologists and plastic surgeons. Unwilling to return to her native Virginia, Kelsey asked Thomas to pay for her rental housing in California, arguing it would be easier to find a job there, and the local climate was better for her children. It didn't take much to persuade the doctor, who simply paid the necessary amount for the apartment Kelsey liked. There were rumors that the odd pair were intimately involved, and this was why the elderly, respected doctor indulged every whim of the striking young blonde. While these rumors might have some basis, the men's magazine model claimed that Thomas had purely paternal feelings towards her and her children and helped selflessly. This was also echoed in court by Judy Earp, albeit with the caveat that Turner shamelessly exploited the doctor's kindness and his progressing dementia. It's worth noting that in addition to paying for rental housing, bills, and simply handing out large sums of cash for necessities, Thomas also rented a car for the young woman. However, it wasn't a practical family minivan suitable for safely transporting children, but a luxurious Mercedes-Benz convertible. Eventually, Kelsey realized that her modeling career was behind her, her youth was fading, and offers for shoots had ceased entirely. Yet, she didn't consider burdening herself with any other job, living instead on the largesse of her elderly benefactor. Attempts to break free, blackmail, and threats. Over nearly 3 years of this peculiar relationship, Dr. Burchard spent around $500,000 on the blonde and her children. However, Kelsey squandered all the money, undergoing breast augmentation and liposuction in hopes of reigniting her modeling career. She indulged in endless luxuries, while her children were largely neglected amid her non-stop partying. This led to Kelsey's ex-husband successfully gaining sole custody of their daughter through the court, stripping Kelsey of her parental rights. This left her with only her younger son, whose father, as mentioned earlier, had never shown any interest in his child. When Thomas learned about this development, he was furious, not with the girl's ex-husband, but with Kelsey herself. He realized that she was a negligent mother who did not bother to care for her children and spent all the money meant for them on her own needs, entertainment, and outfits. Dr. Burchard decided to have a serious talk with Kelsey, informing her that he would no longer sponsor her lavish and idle lifestyle. In response, Kelsey threatened to spread rumors that the respected child psychiatrist harbored inappropriate intimate interests in his young patients. Of course, this was a falsehood, but any gossip on the matter could severely damage the reputation of the esteemed doctor and academic. Reluctantly, Burchard agreed to Kelsey's terms and continued to transfer money and pay her bills. In early 2019, Kelsey decided to move to Las Vegas with her son to try and revive her modeling career. Naturally, she expected Thomas, whom she continued to blackmail, to finance this venture. The doctor rented a house Kelsey had chosen and transferred the amount of money she requested. After this, Kelsey disappeared for 2 months, giving no sign of her whereabouts. The fateful trip. In late February 2019, Kelsey Turner resurfaced as she was running out of money. She called Thomas, sobbing, and began to tell him about her severe illness, inability to work, and struggled to provide for her son. However, when the doctor refused to help, Kelsey's tone changed abruptly, and she started threatening and blackmailing him again. It's important to note that Judy Earp had long been urging Dr. Burchard to report Kelsey to the police, revealing her blackmail and extortion. Judy also suggested involving Child Protective Services, given that Kelsey, already stripped of her parental rights over her older daughter, was incapable of adequately caring for her young son. In case the matter went to court, Dr. Burchard secured support from his colleagues, who were informed about the situation and promised to back him up. Earlier, Judy even tried to talk to Kelsey herself, hoping to persuade her to leave Thomas alone, but was only met with threats of retaliation. This time, Dr. Burchard decided to go to Las Vegas himself to verify Kelsey's claims, though he already knew the answer. Judy tried to dissuade him from the trip, but the elderly man was adamant. She then urged him to take her or one of his friends along. However, Thomas insisted that it was his personal problem and that he needed to resolve it himself. He embarked on his journey on March 1st, 2019. A body in the trunk amidst the desert. On the morning of March 7th, a group of tourists traveling through Nevada deviated from the main highway onto a dirt road leading to Lake Mead. En route, they spotted a solitary Mercedes-Benz convertible parked in the middle of the desert with its windows up and roof closed. The absence of anyone nearby seemed odd and suspicious. Driven by curiosity, the travelers approached and noticed one of the car windows was shattered. Peering inside, they discovered signs of a struggle, with bloodstains throughout the interior. The tourists immediately reported their grim discovery to the police. Law enforcement officers arrived at the scene around noon under the scorching sun and were instantly hit by an unbearable stench of decay. The source was quickly identified when the police opened the trunk. Beneath a pile of items and rags lay the lifeless body of an elderly man, next to him a blood-stained baseball bat. You may have guessed that the body belonged to Dr. Burchard, who had been missing for 5 days by that point. Judy had reported his disappearance on March 2nd when she couldn't reach Thomas at their scheduled time. She instantly feared something terrible had happened and promptly contacted the police, hoping he would be found alive. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The autopsy revealed numerous injuries on the elderly man's body, including abrasions, bruises, and superficial cuts. He had sustained several severe head injuries, likely inflicted with the baseball bat found beside him in the trunk. Part of his ear had been severed, and his hands bore numerous cuts indicating a desperate attempt at defense. Also notable were bruises on his face with a peculiar imprinted pattern. Most horrifyingly, it seemed the man had been placed in the trunk while wounded but still alive, and had slowly suffocated under the intense desert sun. Main suspects and crime scene investigation. Since the car found at the scene was rented in Kelsey Turner's name, she immediately became the primary suspect. Judy provided the police with the address where the blonde lived and where the deceased doctor had headed, as the house was rented in his name. However, upon arrival, the police found no one there. Inside, containers of cleaning agents were scattered everywhere, and the air was still thick with the scent of household chemicals. It was clear that a hasty cleanup had been attempted to erase any evidence of the crime. The house was occupied by Turner, her 4-year-old son, and her new boyfriend, John Logan Kennison, along with 2 neighbors, Diana Pina and Jeremy Esherick. All had fled, making them suspects, as the petite blonde couldn't have inflicted such injuries on the doctor or placed his body in the car trunk by herself. The only person police managed to interview was Jeremy. He and his girlfriend, who had been visiting him, left the house while the doctor was still alive and unharmed. Jeremy recounted that his girlfriend had drunk too much and flirted with the doctor, attempting to get a couple of $100, mimicking Kelsey's tactics. Kelsey became enraged, accusing the woman of trying to steal Thomas from her. The 2 women almost fought, and Jeremy had to quickly take his girlfriend away from the house. He hadn't returned for several days and was unaware of the subsequent events. Police also learned from Judy that Dr. Burchard always carried a notebook with bank account details and passwords, which he often forgot. This notebook was missing, and large sums of money were withdrawn from 2 of his accounts on March 3rd. The accounts and cards were immediately blocked, and on March 21st, in Stockton, California, Kelsey and her boyfriend John were arrested after another attempt to withdraw money. For nearly 3 weeks, the couple, along with their child, had been hiding in motels, moving from place to place and paying in cash. They regretted not completely emptying Burchard's accounts initially and decided to do so later, planning to flee to Mexico with the money. However, by the time they tried again, the accounts were blocked, and the police arrived promptly. Reconstructing the timeline of events. While Kelsey and John adamantly denied any wrongdoing, a third participant in the events, Diana, voluntarily surrendered to the police and narrated what transpired on the night of March 2nd. According to her, after Jeremy and his girlfriend left, Turner had a severe altercation with Dr. Burchard, angered by his declaration that he would not give her another cent. She threatened to tarnish his reputation by spreading rumors about the psychiatrist's inappropriate behavior with his young patients. As Kelsey became physically aggressive, the elderly man locked himself in a room. John, with a forceful shoulder thrust, broke down the door and severely struck the older man with a bat, causing a massive hematoma and a nosebleed. Diana rushed in, pleading for everyone to calm down. Seeing Thomas's condition, She urged them to take him to the hospital, fearing the consequences of their actions. After extracting a promise from the doctor that he would tell the police he was attacked and robbed by strangers, all four drove to the garage. Burchard was seated in the back of the car. Kelsey then instructed Diana to return to the house and clean up thoroughly, erasing all blood traces. Diana obediently started the cleanup, but soon heard Dr. Burchard's cries and the sounds of a struggle. Rushing back to the garage, she saw the couple brutally assaulting the elderly man, trapped between them in the car, unable to escape or defend himself. It turned out that Kelsey and Kennison never intended to take the man to the hospital. They planned to finish him off using the bat and a small knife, inflicting cuts. John also repeatedly hit the doctor in the face with the handle of his unloaded pistol, causing the peculiar patterned bruises. Diana was again ordered back to the house to continue cleaning. Fearing she might be next if she didn't comply, she left the garage. While she was still cleaning inside, she heard car engines and saw the couple's two vehicles leaving. A few hours later, only John's car returned, with Kelsey accompanying him. Diana remained unaware of the convertible's whereabouts until news reports surfaced about a car found in the desert with a body in the trunk. Trial and sentence. From the outset, Diana opted for a plea deal, agreeing to tell everything she knew. This helped her avoid charges of complicity, leading to a lighter sentence for evidence tampering, which resulted in only 3 years of imprisonment. The former lovers, on the other hand, stubbornly shifted the blame onto each other. However, proving their guilt was straightforward, as they left substantial evidence in the car, and their phones were traced to the desert on the night of March 2nd, at the location where they abandoned the car with the body. Kennison was found guilty of second-degree homicide and sentenced to 45 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 years. The situation with Turner was more complex. Shortly after her arrest, she declared her pregnancy, significantly delaying the trial. During her incarceration, she gave birth to a girl who, along with her son, was placed under the care of social services, as none of Turner's relatives were willing to assume such responsibility. In January 2023, following her attorney's advice, Kelsey admitted her guilt and was sentenced to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole no earlier than after 10 years. She is currently serving her sentence at the Florence McClure Women's Correctional Center in Las Vegas. In conclusion, it's worth noting that in February 2023, ABC's documentary series 20/20 Inches aired an episode titled A Model Murder, detailing the heinous crime committed by Turner and her boyfriend against Dr. Burchard. Over the years, however, the definition has evolved and varies across countries, depending on cultural context. In most places, it is classified as a severe crime against women, including assault, maiming, or causing death, perpetrated by men amid gender-based animosity. It's often said that women allow themselves to be mistreated, not reporting to police or leaving the men who cause them emotional and physical suffering, and sometimes even continuing to live with someone who might end their life at any moment. This claim is only partially true, as in some countries, the law inherently sides with men, giving them confidence that they will face no repercussions. The story of a young woman named Abril Perez is one of the most vivid examples of how femicide thrives among the affluent sectors of Mexican society. She and her husband, Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, were wealthy and respected individuals, holding executive positions in major companies, and from the outside, their marriage seemed flawless. Yet this did not prevent the man from abusing his wife over the years and eventually having someone else violently end her life, also risking the lives of their children. To this day, this case remains unresolved, and all but the main perpetrator have been punished. Abril Perez, family and early years. Abril Sagaon. Perez was born on November 18, 1971, in Monterrey, in the northeastern part of Mexico, and was the second of 3 children to parents Maria del Socorro Sagaon and Manuel Perez. Raised alongside her older brother Javier and younger sister Ama, the family lived modestly, but her parents did everything possible to provide their children with a good education and motivate them to aspire to a better life. All the children excelled in school, engaged in music, sports, and other talents. Abril, in particular, showed a talent for mathematics and entrepreneurial skills from an early age. She was an avid reader and the top student in her class. As a teenager, Abril began working to achieve financial independence, was frugal, and always had savings. From her school days, she was very disciplined, able to plan and manage her time effectively. She dreamed of obtaining a high-quality higher education to secure a well-paying job with career advancement opportunities. After finishing high school, Abril was admitted to the most prestigious university in Nuevo Leon, where she earned a master's degree in finance and business administration. Her classmates described her as smart, incredibly focused and ambitious, but also cheerful, kind-hearted, and always ready to help others. Upon graduating, Perez was hired in the sales department of one of the country's largest and fastest-growing companies. A few years later, she ventured into digital sales, a new booming field, and realized this was her calling. Quickly rising through the ranks, she became the executive director of the company within 2 years. Abril was young, beautiful, successful, ambitious, and steadily advancing towards the life she had always dreamed of. She built a brilliant career, supported her family, and was full of plans for the future. Yet her personal life remained unsettled, which disappointed her loved ones. Nevertheless, she was confident she would find true love and live a long, happy life. Little did Perez know how her marriage to the perfect man would turn out. Meeting Juan Carlos in the mid-1990s, as Abril's career was on the rise, fate brought her together with a young man named Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez. He was just 3 years her senior and equally ambitious career-wise, which greatly appealed to her. In return, he was captivated by her beauty, charm, kindness, and disarming smile, combined with a sharp intellect and remarkable determination. Sanchez was a graduate of a prestigious science and technology university, where he excelled in the economics and trade department. He later continued his education in the United States at Harvard University, after which he returned to Mexico and built a successful career in the relatively new field of e-commerce. The young professionals met at a conference dedicated to the latest financial technologies. They crossed paths several more times as their companies collaborated on joint projects, and eventually, Juan Carlos realized he had fallen in love with this intelligent beauty. Through mutual acquaintances, he obtained her phone number and decided to invite Perez out on a date. The feelings were mutual. She also found this educated, erudite man capable of holding a conversation on almost any topic, appealing and interesting. Their relationship developed quickly, and by 1998, the couple decided to formalize their relationship with a lavish wedding. By then, they had both achieved considerable career success and were involved in developing online stores, a very promising direction. Their life resembled a true fairy tale, evoking envy and admiration among their peers. Dark secrets of the perfect family. It wasn't until 2001, after 3 years of marriage, that the couple welcomed their long-awaited first child, a daughter they named Ama Cecilia. 30-year-old Abril was overjoyed, as the arrival of the child marked a new chapter in their lives. Her husband also seemed happy, treating their newborn daughter with tenderness and awe. 2 years later, Abril gave her beloved a son, whom they named after his father, Juan Carlos Jr. Another 2 years passed, and the family welcomed a third child, a boy named Julio Andreas. It's worth noting that the young mother hardly took any maternity leave and managed to brilliantly combine parental responsibilities with her career advancement. She prepared only homemade meals, helped the children with their schoolwork, took them to sports activities, and strived to be not just an ideal mother, but also their best friend. From the outside, the Perez Sanchez family appeared perfect in every way. Wealthy, successful, raising 3 wonderful children, having everything one could wish for, and seeming very happy. But appearances can be deceiving. What happened inside their home remained unknown even to the couple's closest relatives for a long time. In reality, Juan Carlos showed his true nature in the first years of their life together. He was hot-tempered, aggressive, and rather harsh, intolerant of compromise, insisting that everything had to be exactly as he wanted. But Abril was in love, and initially thought that over time they would rub along and his character would soften. Moreover, their joint projects united them. They worked towards a common goal, and their teamwork yielded impressive results, including financially. However, over time, he became more irritable, and verbal altercations escalated into physical confrontations. After the birth of their first daughter, the husband briefly softened, trying to keep his emotions in check, but it didn't last long. The same happened after the birth of their eldest son, but by the time the third child was born, he no longer even tried to be a good father or husband. Juan Carlos vented his anger, negative emotions, or just bad mood on his wife, sparing no feelings. He insulted and belittled the mother of his children, and her tears seemed to lift his spirits. He then began to regularly physically harm his wife, often doing so in a way that left no visible marks on exposed parts of her body, so she could hide the bruises under clothing or mask them with makeup. All this was done with one simple purpose: to protect his flawless reputation and pride himself on being considered a model family man, loving husband, and father. Abril kept silent for years, trying not to tell even her sister and mother about the ongoing nightmare. She earned well and could have raised the children on her own, providing them with a good education and a stable upbringing. But her husband was a wealthy and very influential man, and he could easily take the children away from her through the courts. Knowing what Juan Carlos was really like, Perez could not bear the thought of her daughter and sons being left alone with a real monster, capable of anything, starting over with old problems. 2010 approached. The situation within the family escalated to its limit, to the extent that those who once considered this household ideal began to suspect something terrible was happening within. Abril was not just subdued, but deeply distressed, visibly thinner, sleeping poorly, and frequently had bruises on her face and body that became increasingly difficult to conceal and impossible for her to explain. Juan Carlos maintained a calm and confident demeanor, pretending that nothing was wrong. In public, he continued to play the role of a loving and caring husband, interacting with his wife politely and affectionately, but at home, he transformed into a monster, making it increasingly dangerous to be near him. Despite pleas from loved ones to divorce, Abril stubbornly insisted that everything was fine and that she would handle the problems with her husband herself. 2014 marked the peak of Sanchez's career when he became the head of a major trading company and one of the most influential people in the field. After this promotion, the family moved to Mexico City and settled in a large house in one of the capital's best neighborhoods. Their children attended an elite private school, and a beleaguered Perez sincerely hoped that the move and complete change in scenery would positively affect their relationship. Contrary to expectations, changed. The man continued to physically harm and insult his wife, increasingly doing so in front of their children. Furthermore, Juan Carlos began to groundlessly accuse his wife of infidelity, and whenever she tried to defend herself, he resorted to using his fists, claiming he would find evidence of her disloyalty. He monitored her phone and emails, forbade her from using social media, and later, finding no evidence, even hired a private detective to follow Abril and photograph any men who came near her. 2 attempts on her life. For another 4 years, the woman tried everything to save her marriage, though her husband's behavior became utterly unbearable. She lived in a never-ending nightmare that outwardly seemed like a happy and successful union. Many even envied Abril, as she had such a prominent, influential, wealthy, and as many thought, caring husband. In 2018, the Sanchez family traveled to Monterrey to celebrate Catholic Christmas with the Perez family. However, Juan Carlos behaved toward his wife as he was accustomed, not shying away from her parents, who were horrified by what they witnessed. At that moment, the woman realized things could not continue this way and informed her husband that she would file for divorce once they returned to Mexico City. Hearing this, in a fit of rage, he grabbed her throat and squeezed so tightly she nearly lost consciousness. Only her mother, Maria del Socorro, entering the room and raising the alarm, prevented a tragedy. When the family returned to their home in the capital, Abril, preparing for divorce, moved from the marital bedroom to a small guest room, but this did not save her from the tyrant. On the morning of January 4th, while she was still asleep, her husband entered the bedroom holding a baseball bat. He struck her hard on the head and was about to swing again. Half awake, Perez barely understood what was happening, but managed to slip off the bed just in time, literally saving her own life. The woman began to scream, and the children ran into the room, having heard the noise. The youngest son shielded his mother with his body, while the eldest son took the bat from his father. Together with their mother, they fled the house and headed to the hospital as Abril needed medical attention. Doctors diagnosed her with a serious concussion and a deep laceration above her eyebrow, which required stitches. Marital conflict. As soon as his wife and sons left the home, Juan Carlos contacted his lawyer to explain the situation and asked for help in resolving it. He also posted on his social media page, claiming that his wife had betrayed him, was unfaithful, and intended to leave him for another man, taking their children and attempting to take all their jointly acquired assets. Moreover, he claimed that his wife had stolen all the money from their home safe and that when he tried to stop her, she injured him with a knife in the shoulder. As proof, he posted photos of a bloodied knife and brown stains on the floor. However, the blood on the floor was actually Abril's from her own room, and the knife photo was taken from the internet. Nonetheless, Sanchez's friends believed his story and began actively sharing and reposting his account on their personal social media pages, calling for widespread attention to this egregious case. While still in the hospital, Perez filed a police report against her husband, accusing him of attempting to end her life. After being discharged, she moved out of their home, taking her sons with her, over whom she was granted temporary sole custody. Their eldest daughter, by then an adult who had finished school and moved to another city for college, also sided with her mother, condemning her father's cruel and unacceptable behavior. Sanchez was ordered to pay alimony to his ex-wife and sons while they stayed with their mother, although the amount was quite small, about $300, which he disagreed with. He himself faced a potential prison sentence, but the influential businessman was confident he would remain free and avoid any punishment. After enduring such a nightmare, Abril decided to return to her native Monterrey, to her parents' home, taking her children with her. It was there that she filed for divorce, and from there she monitored the situation. Meanwhile, she began offering help and online consultations to women in similar situations, and she planned to open a center for psychological and legal assistance for victims of domestic violence. Corrupt justice system. Only in September 2019, 8.5 months after the incident, was Sanchez finally arrested on charges of femicide, inflicting bodily harm and attempting to end his wife's life. He was placed in jail, where he spent over a month, but by November of that year, he managed to appeal the pretrial detention decision and was released. The case was presided over by Judge Federico Mas, who unexpectedly reclassified it, leading to a new trial. During the trial, photographs of Perez from the hospital and entries from her medical records were not presented, and the testimonies of the woman and her sons were deemed insufficient grounds for detaining Juan Carlos. Furthermore, the defendant insisted that his ex-wife was turning the children against him. The defendant was released directly from the courtroom, as Judge Mas considered that his actions did not pose a direct threat to the victim's life. According to the judge, if Sanchez had truly intended to end his wife's life, he would have followed through, especially since she was asleep during the attack and unable to resist. Abril was shocked and frightened by this turn of events. She realized that her ex-husband had utilized all his connections and paid off the right people to be set free, putting her and her children in danger. She sent an official letter to the judge expressing fear for her life, but it had no impact on the situation. Immediately after being released, Juan Carlos began legal proceedings against his ex-wife for custody of their sons. He forced her and the children to return to Mexico City to attend court sessions. Otherwise, the matter could be resolved in absentia, not in her favor, so she was compelled to return to the capital. Tragedy. Witnessed by children. On November 25th, Abril arrived in Mexico City with her children. She genuinely feared the man she had lived with for over 20 years and did not want to encounter him unnecessarily. She planned to leave the city the same day after the hearing and had already purchased plane tickets, which Juan Carlos knew about. Ironically, on that day, a mass demonstration against gender-based violence was taking place in the capital. Immediately after the court session, the woman, along with her sons and their lawyer, got into a car heading to the airport, but they never reached their destination. At a traffic light, a motorcyclist pulled up next to their car, unexpectedly drew a handgun, and fired twice at Perez, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, before swiftly fleeing the scene. One of the bullets passed through and grazed the younger son, who was sitting in the back seat, but fortunately, none of the children were seriously hurt. The injured woman was quickly taken to the nearest hospital, where doctors fought desperately for over 6 hours to save her life. Unfortunately, due to severe injuries and significant blood loss, they were unable to save 48-year-old Abril, who passed away that evening. The victim's parents, brother, and sister flew to the capital immediately and urged authorities to arrest Juan Carlos, convinced that he was behind this brutal act that occurred in front of the children. However, law enforcement had a different view, stating that without identifying the shooter, it was difficult to discuss his motives, and it could not be definitively claimed that it was a hitman sent by Sanchez. The case was not classified as femicide until further investigation. Predictably, Juan Carlos remained free, and the police began searching for the shooter, which could take an extended period. The orphaned children were temporarily placed under the care of their maternal relatives, while their father prepared to fight for them in court again. Abril's sister wrote an angry post on her social media account openly blaming Sanchez for the incident, but her page was soon blocked and later deleted. Nonetheless, the family decided to fight and draw heightened public attention to the case, highlighting that the attack on Perez happened on the day dedicated to fighting gender-based violence, public outcry, and the flight of the main suspect. The victims' relatives managed to draw attention to the tragedy that struck their family. Moreover, people openly discussed numerous cases where men attempted to end women's lives, but did not follow through and remained free without facing any punishment. Due to the significant public outcry, the General Prosecutor's Office of Mexico initiated a new investigation concerning Sanchez and was also instructed to check the legality of the actions of the judges who had released him. The judges handling Juan Carlos's case were temporarily suspended from work and later removed from their positions. Mexican politician and women's rights defender Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo officially confirmed that the Perez case had been reclassified as femicide and would be reinvestigated, and the judges who had released Juan Carlos could face consequences for the woman's death if his guilt was proven. The businessman regularly posted on social media calling for the perpetrator of his former wife to be found and punished to the fullest extent of the law. He also noted that despite the disagreements between him and Abril, he would never dare harm the mother of his children, let alone end her life in front of their sons. However, his daughter Ana Cecilia left an angry comment under one of these posts, accusing her father of cruelty and accompanying her words with photos of her mother taken in the hospital after Juan Carlos had attacked her with a bat. Despite the resonance and widespread media coverage of the case, it was decided to leave Sanchez free during the investigation. He was placed under a restraining order and required to check in weekly at a police station, but after he failed to appear at the appointed time, a warrant for his arrest was issued for violating the order. As one might guess, no one could find the accused. It turned out that the businessman again used his money and connections to quickly leave the country and enter the United States. Mexican authorities contacted Interpol, reporting the fugitive accused of a serious crime, and the next day, Sanchez was declared wanted almost worldwide. Arrest of hired criminals and reconstruction of the crime scene. During this time, efforts were underway to locate the hired criminal who, it turned out, did not work alone. Surveillance footage from street cameras clearly showed 2 vehicles following the car from the courthouse, in which Abril, her children, and their lawyer were traveling. The motorcyclist, who later emerged and performed the lethal act, appeared to be in constant communication with the individuals in the aforementioned cars, receiving directions and instructions. It took investigators several months to identify just some of the participants of the incident, and it wasn't until March 5, 2020, that 2 suspects were arrested in connection to the case. Surprisingly, they did not resist arrest and almost immediately started giving testimonies, hoping to mitigate their sentences. It was confirmed that the orchestrator of the crime was indeed Juan Carlos, who had paid a substantial amount, with 7 people directly involved in carrying out the act. The first to be apprehended were the driver of one of the chase cars and the motorcyclist who fired the fatal shots. It emerged that, while in prison, Juan Carlos had hired a couple of seasoned criminals to protect him, acting as his personal bodyguards. One of these criminals was released a week before Sanchez, and the other was freed several days after him. Once out of prison, the businessman reconnected with them, asking them to find reliable people to carry out the elimination of a person, promising a substantial sum of money to each if successful. When all participants were identified, the orchestrator transferred the promised money and provided precise instructions about the route and vehicle Abril would be using. The most challenging part of the plan turned out to be luring his former wife to Mexico City. The man resorted to blackmail, threatening to take the children if she did not appear in court. Although she complied with the court appearance, she had no intention of staying in the capital, planning to return to Monterrey the same day, and Juan Carlos knew this from his sources. Despite this information, it wasn't until the end of October 2020 that 3 more participants in the criminal conspiracy were apprehended. Moreover, the arrest of these criminals was initially on suspicion of distributing controlled substances, and it was only at the police station that it was discovered these individuals could be involved in the high-profile crime. All arrested were part of a major drug trafficker, Juan Carlos Maldonado's gang, known as Juan Balto. He had served time with Sanchez and provided him protection, later agreeing to assist in eliminating his former wife for a hefty reward. Maldonado was arrested a couple of weeks later in November 2020. He began giving testimonies, confirming that the businessman had sought reliable individuals to end his ex-wife's life, and he agreed to help him in return for a substantial reward. There was no doubt left that Sanchez was both the client and organizer of the crime, and his previous assault on Abril with a bat was officially reclassified as an attempt on her life, leading the court to finally issue an arrest warrant for him on charges of femicide. However, the man's whereabouts remained unknown. By spring 2021, the remaining participants in the commissioned perpetration of Perez were found and arrested. Notably, one of them was already serving a sentence for another crime at the time. Also, during extensive searches, the weapon used to make the fatal shots was found. In total, 9 people associated with the same criminal group were detained, 7 of whom were directly involved in chasing and shooting Abril. Almost 5 years after the woman's death, the main culprit and client of the crime, Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, remains at large, with his whereabouts still undetermined. The individual who pulled the trigger, ending the life of a mother of 3, was sentenced to 52 years in prison. 2 other criminals who chased the car and coordinated the shooter's actions were also sentenced to 50 years each. The other arrested participants of the incident are still under investigation, and their fate has yet to be decided.
He called her name menacingly, and she stopped to examine the unfamiliar silhouette in the darkness. The stranger quickly approached her and grabbed her. She squealed loudly, but a sharp pain knocked her off her feet and the girl fell. The disappearance of people is not an uncommon phenomenon. We live in a disturbing world in which all sorts of things happen to people. Sometimes they disappear through their own fault or through the fault of an intruder. There are many mysterious and unsolved cases of missing citizens all over the world. Analyzing missing persons reports and reviewing police reports shows that the number of disappearance cases has multiplied in 2 decades. Today, let's talk about a case that is still considered one of the worst injustices in the history of the Spanish judicial system, because decades later, Spain cannot forget the story that took place on the Costa del Sol. This story has everything: love, disappearance, blood, and cruel injustice, which will definitely be corrected, but at a very high cost, which for many years will be remembered not only by Spaniards, but also by the whole world. Hilaria Alicia Hornos was born December 2, 1952 in the rural province of Jaén, in the municipality of Arroyo de los Llancos, Spain. At the age of 24, Alicia fell in love and married a Dutch citizen, Willem Waninkoff. Soon the family had their firstborn son Guillermo, then a daughter Rosa, then another daughter Rosio. With the appearance of children, the relationship between the spouses became quite tense. Willem became addicted to drinking and because of the long absences and lost his job. At the peak of loud arguments, Willem raised his voice at Alicia and could even hit. In order to provide for her family, Alicia had to take a job as a maid in a hotel in Ibiza. It was during this difficult period of her life that Alicia met Dolores Vasquez, who was the director of the hotel where she worked. Maria Dolores Vasquez was the daughter of immigrants from Galicia, Spain, who had settled in the UK. She had a good education and was well-mannered and an interesting conversationalist. A strong friendship developed between the two women, which later developed into a love relationship. A year after the beginning of the relationship with Dolores, Alicia dared to leave her husband and officially formalize the divorce. Willem returned to the Netherlands, and Alicia moved in with Dolores. Soon the women in love bought a new house in Malaga. After the divorce, Alicia received full custody of the 3 children and raised them with Dolores. After her parents divorced in 1983, Rosio and her sister Rosa looked up to Dolores as a second mother and proudly signed Vasquez Hornos. All 3 of Alicia's children adored Dolores. The 5 of them lived in complete love and understanding as a true family. In 1988, the women decided to break off their love relationship, but continued to live together as good friends until 1994. After 11 years together, they finally broke up and Alicia started dating another man, Juan Charillo. Alicia moved into a new home and fully immersed herself in a new romantic relationship. Life for her was filled with new colors and love. Because the children grew up, the beloved man was always near. But at one point, the fairy tale turned into a nightmare. On the morning of October 10th, 1999, Alicia did not find her daughter Rosio at home. At first, Alicia wasn't worried, believing her daughter might have spent the night at her boyfriend's or one of her friends' houses. But when she didn't return home later, Alicia became concerned. The family contacted Rosio's friends and boyfriend, hoping to get reassuring information about their daughter's whereabouts, but no one had seen her. On September 9th, Rosio left home around 5:30 p.m. after saying goodbye to her mother and older sister, Rosa. On that day, she was going with her boyfriend Antonio and her friends to go to a fair in Fuengirola. The girl's house was in the neighborhood of La Cortiera, very close to Antonio's house. Rosio stayed at his house until 10:30 in the evening and decided to return home for a short while to shower and change clothes before meeting her boyfriend and friends at the fair. She never made it home. Even though Alicia was already worried, she decided to take a walk with Juan to calm down rather than immediately report her daughter's disappearance to the police. As they were walking down the street, the woman saw a large blood stain on the road, as if some animal had been killed. She told Juan about it. At first, they didn't pay much attention to it, but when they got closer, Alicia saw sneakers with drops of blood. They were her daughter's sneakers. From Alicia Hornos's recollection, I got closer and saw my daughter's sneakers. I said, "Those are Rosio's sneakers," and he said, "No way." I said, "No, those are my daughter's sneakers." I was hysterical. I said, "Call the police, those are her sneakers." During that walk, in addition to the sneakers, a napkin and several blood stains were found in a vacant lot next to the road Rosio usually walked on. Alicia called the police. Immediately, a missing girl report was filed with a full description. Long hair, brown eyes, wearing a white Nike t-shirt and purple pants. After the officially announced search activities, the forensic investigator reported the need to conduct a forensic examination at the alleged crime scene to find out whose blood was on the road and sneakers. After examining the scene, the first assumptions were the version of an assault or a fight in which someone was injured. But the further investigators followed the trail, the more they found blood stains, and even long chains of stains that looked like drag marks. That means someone was moving very fast, maybe even running. Then the blood traces disappeared, and then the search team noticed a very large stain indicating significant blood loss.
they found more and more bloody footprints similar to the drag marks of a bloody body. These tracks led to car tire prints, after which the blood traces disappeared. A cigarette butt, the brand of which was not common in Spain, was found next to the tread marks. Forensics collected all the samples that could help in any way during the investigation, and DNA from the samples was supposed to help find whoever was at the scene. Based on this data, a thorough investigation was conducted. Along with the investigation and the identification of the blood taken from the traces found, the search for the girl continued. But the investigators were almost certain that Rosio Waninkoff had been murdered. After all, the blood trail started from the sidewalk and continued to a pool of blood large enough to cause her death from volumetric blood loss. Next to the pool were drag marks, and intersecting them and the blood were tire tracks left by a small car with a tire model that was discontinued in 1993. Because the drag marks continued across a heavily sloped area that would have made it difficult for one person to drag the body alone, it was believed that the body was dragged by at least 2 people and then left in a less open area of the vacant lot before a vehicle pulled up to transport the body. But the search did not stop. Volunteers scoured the area on foot, on motorcycles, up hills. Everyone wanted to find Rosio, but at the same time, they were afraid to find her dead. It was very hard for everyone. There were flyers with Rosio's picture everywhere. All the news channels reported about her disappearance. The family actively cooperated with journalists, because as long as Rosio was being talked about, she would not be forgotten. Journalists from all TV channels were on duty at Rosio Vaninkoff's house. Everyone wanted the girl to come home, to find her. Time passed, but the search did not yield any results. A few days after Rosio's disappearance, a local cab driver showed up at the police station and said that on the night of the incident, around 10 p.m., he dodged an SUV that was speeding in the oncoming lane of traffic in the area where the girl's sneakers were found on the curb. He added that he heard a piercing scream as he passed the vehicle. There was no doubt, Rosio had been kidnapped and killed by an unknown assailant. This was confirmed by DNA analysis. The blood on the road belonged to Rosio Vaninkoff. The family was at a loss for words. These feelings were spreading fast. They were felt not only by the girl's family and friends, but by the whole of Spain. On November 2nd, 1999, 25 days after Rosio's disappearance, a disfigured body, possibly Rosio's, was found near the Los Altos del Rodeo Sports Club, between Marbella and San Pedro de Alcantara. The body was partially covered with bushes and fallen leaves, and was hidden behind a hedge separating a housing development that was quite close to the highway. It was a narrow path that could hardly be traveled by car. The girl was searched for within the confines of her home, and she was found in another town. When the police arrived at the place, they found the body very badly decomposed. During the evidence collection, large black garbage bags were found containing the girl's clothes. One of the bags had the number 8 painted on it, indicating that the bags had not been purchased specifically for the transportation of the body, but had only been reused. Upon discovering the clothes, investigators concluded that the clothes could have belonged to the missing Rosio Waninkoff. The missing person's sister, Rosa, recognized several rings, 2 t-shirts, and other items found in 2 garbage bags near the body as belonging to Rosio. The t-shirts were torn from stab wounds, and clothing below the waist was never found. The remains of the body were taken to the lab for forensic analysis. 6 forensic experts worked slowly and meticulously all night, using all their knowledge and skills. They had a difficult job ahead of them, because the body was badly decomposed. Decomposition is much faster in rain and heat when there is a certain amount of humidity. Not a single organ was preserved, only the bones were intact. The goal was to find something else that could help the investigation and tell us how the attack took place. As a result, numerous close wounds were found, and there were 8 stab wounds on his back caused by a weapon with a single-sided blade. According to experts, the attack was very fast and brutal. Most likely the victim was immobilized or did not have time to react. Fingerprints were found on plastic bags that were found where the body was found. Police already had fingerprints and tire prints from the car. They also found 2 tissue samples on Rosio Waninkoff's body.
At that point, there was still too little evidence that would lead to the arrest of a specific suspect. But the investigation had some evidence, data, and leads that the civil guard was looking into. The public pressure had an undue influence, and the investigators were just bound to find something, but they did not. Because Rosio's body was badly decomposed, it was impossible to establish basic details, such as whether the girl had been sexually assaulted. Investigators came to one conclusion when they saw a corpse with its legs spread apart. Since the victim's legs were spread too wide, they thought it was staged. That is, the perpetrator made it look like violence. So they ruled out the motive of sexual assault and subsequent murder, and focused on a crime motivated by revenge and hatred. It was a very emotional attack, which meant that the girl could have been attacked by someone very close to her, who may have been very upset with her. With the evidence and facts gathered, the investigators conducted follow-up interviews. First of all, the investigators questioned her boyfriend, Antonio Hirata. He was the last person to see Rosio alive, and he was the one she was supposed to meet again that night. But the guy had an alibi, because he just fell asleep at home and did not go to the fair that day. All of Rosio's relatives and friends were questioned, but they all had solid alibis. A year after Rosio Waninkov's death, the civil guard was able to narrow down the number of suspects, and by the end of the year they found a suspect who, in the opinion of the investigation, all the signs pointed to. That person turned out to be Dolores Vasquez. There was absolutely no evidence against Dolores, but thanks to the media, everyone began to believe this woman was guilty. Dolores Vasquez was a close friend of Alicia's. As it often happens, journalists distorted and even invented information. Allegedly, Alicia from the very first day accused Dolores in the death of her daughter. But at the time of the crime, their relationship had already ended 4 years ago. The investigation actively went after the public. The investigation focused entirely on Dolores, and now there was a motive in the case. A young girl could be a hindrance, or otherwise interfere with the romantic relationship between the two women. Everyone said that if it hadn't been for Rosio, maybe Alicia would have gone back to Dolores. It was Dolores' way of getting back at Alicia for not wanting to go back to her. That's what people said. In the eyes of the press and the public, Dolores Vasquez was guilty from the moment she was arrested. Even though the woman did not confess to anything, residents were convinced of her guilt mainly because the police believed that someone close to her was the killer. Family members claimed that Dolores was an aggressive and violent woman who was also very jealous. Alicia told reporters that Dolores was a vindictive and cruel person. The public condemned Dolores. The fact that Dolores Vasquez was non-traditional was a reason to attack her during the trial. This was not the norm in Spain. A sarcastic, aggressive, calculating, cold-blooded woman. The character was beginning to take shape. A vicious, heartless woman. A woman who bided her time for 4 years, finally coming up with a crime plan out of hatred. The audience cheered, having independently created the image of a calculating villainess for Dolores. The trial turned into an entertainment. People watched the trial only because they had nothing better to do. A huge number of people gathered outside the courthouse. People wanted to get into the courthouse to follow the trial and not miss a second. Journalists were all over the news that a close family friend had been charged with the murder of Rosio Waninkov. Dolores Vasquez was the kind of woman no one liked. Therefore, she had virtually no chance at trial. She wasn't friendly or nice. But how many people are there in the world who are not sociable and friendly with everyone? We don't call them all criminals because they don't smile at us when we meet them, do we? In this case, the battle was fought not only in the courthouse, but also on the streets where the public was involved. All of the information, especially the rumors that the media blew up, could not help but influence the opinion of the jury. After all the TV stations, almost all the TV shows were saying that Dolores Vasquez was the one responsible for Rosio's death, as well as all the information that the reporters were distorting. So a lie told 1,000 times became the truth for Dolores. In fact, there was absolutely no evidence against Dolores Vasquez, but apparently justice just decided that someone should be in jail for it, and chose a victim who had a dubious alibi, as well as a bunch of flaws that automatically made her a scapegoat. Dolores wasn't seen at the scene. The tire tracks didn't match the car she drove. The fabric fibers found didn't match Vasquez's clothes. nor did the fingerprints found on the trash bags at the scene. And she also had an alibi. She claimed that she was babysitting her sick mother that day while watching her little niece. But this was disregarded. More than 50 people were called to court to testify. Only once did Dolores take the stand. "I didn't kill Rosio. I didn't even see her that day. All I'm asking you, I'm asking all of Spain, is to find who did it, because it wasn't me. And whoever did it is still out there. Maybe even among you in the courtroom. There has never been any evidence against me, and there never will be, because I am innocent." Spain has a very poor judicial system that often oversteps the law. Spanish prosecutors and investigating judges are ready to step over the law and human fate to prove their theories. Absolute disregard for the law. There was no physical evidence, so the Civil Guard report described only the circumstantial evidence that pointed to Dolores Vasquez and profiled her psychologically. The jury majority found defendant Dolores Vasquez guilty of murder. She was sentenced to a 16-year prison term. The public rejoiced. Rosio's funeral was very well attended. Journalists were constantly filming despite other people's grief. At that moment, all of Rosio's relatives and all the people in the town lived in fear. This fear fueled the many television programs that covered the details of the case. After Dolores' arrest, the victim's family went from one television program to another, pulling out old stories that confirmed Vasquez's cold, unfriendly, demanding, and cruel character. It took years and another similar crime to make it clear that Rosio Vanenkov was not at all as the public and the press had fantasized. On the morning of August 15, 2003, the parents of 17-year-old Sonia Carabantes reported their daughter's disappearance to the police. They had already called her friends, but they said that they had walked her friend to the door of her house. But Sonia wasn't home. In the street, 3 doors down from her house, right next to a tree, her parents found her shoes, purse, and phone. There were traces of blood on the cars parked nearby. Sound familiar? But if the suspect has been in jail for almost a year and a half, did the police make a mistake and have an innocently convicted person in jail? Authorities immediately began searching for and investigating the coin incident. Time passed, and despair increasingly gripped the family. There were searches in the neighborhood, but the bloodstains on Sonia's clothes left no hope for a favorable outcome. One of the main pieces of evidence in Sonia's case was a car headlight. The officers of the Civil Guard made inquiries to all the car repair shops in search of a car with a broken headlight that matched the description. There were a variety of different theories of the attack. Among them were chains of rape and other similar crimes to the disappearance of the girl in Motril. But the important fact remained that Rosio and Sonia had disappeared during the fair. All employees of the fair who worked in Motril and Coin were checked. Just as in the case of Rosio, flyers with Sonia's image were posted everywhere. So many people were involved in the search for her. They were very active in helping the police, not only by donating their time, but also by providing any assistance needed for the search. In addition to these searches, the Civil Guard also continued their investigation. The main objective was to find the girl alive, but on the 5th day after her disappearance, with the help of search dogs, Sonia's body was found near Coin. It was found in a creek under a pile of rocks. It had rained heavily the night before, washing away any trace that might have helped the police in locating the culprit. On the day of her disappearance, Sonia was at a fair in Coin. She said goodbye to friends near her home. It was there that she was attacked. The perpetrator hit her several times, which made Sonia partially unconscious, and she was unable to fight back because the attack was sudden and violent. The perpetrator then took her away in a car to a remote location away from her home. Both internal and external injuries were inflicted, and then the girl was strangled, which was the cause of death. Due to the fact that Sonia was found very quickly, it was possible to collect all the evidence and analyze the results of the forensic examination. Colonel Pacagabella reported that important evidence was indeed found on the body of Sonia Carabantes. The biological material was analyzed and then entered into the police criminal DNA database, where the much-anticipated matches were obtained with the genetic material found on the cigarette butt that was found at the crime scene in the Rosio Vanenkov case. When the 2 DNA samples were compared, they were found to be identical to each other. The man who killed Rosio in 1999 and the man who attacked Sonia turned out to be the same person. The news was incredible. Dolores Vasquez, who had been condemned without exaggeration by the whole of Spain, turned out to be innocent, while the real culprit walked free and took the life of another young girl. The puzzle is complete. An English brand cigarette butt and skin particles under the victim's fingernails. The DNA from both pieces of evidence belonged to the same person. After that, events began to unfold very quickly. On September 18th, a young woman, Cecilia Pantoja, contacted the police and said she suspected her ex-husband when she saw bloodstains on his t-shirt, just days after Sonia's body was found. She said her husband was also absent from home twice, traveling somewhere in a car on the day of the Rosio attack. Through DNA testing and the woman's testimony, police were able to identify the real killer of Rosio and Sonia. The perpetrator's name was Tony King, and he was well known in Britain as the Holloway Strangler. Tony Alexander King's crime wave began when he was still a teenager in the Holloway neighborhood of North London. In 1985, the neighborhood was the scene of a series of attacks on women in which the victims were strangled and abused. At the time, King went by his birth name, Anthony Bromwich. 5 weeks later, he was finally caught and convicted at the age of 19 for strangling 5 women to unconsciousness with a rope or cable and then abusing them. The judge sentenced him to 10 years in prison, calling him a monster for committing the crimes because of his own inadequacy. He served only half of his sentence and was paroled in 1991, but returned to prison a few weeks later for robbing a woman and threatening her with a knife. In search of a new life, he changed his name to Tony King, married Cecilia Pantoja, and tried to live a normal family life. Their marriage produced a daughter, but King soon returned to his old habits. The police in Spain realized that they were on the right track. Tony King was put under 24-hour surveillance, and a month after Sonia's death he was arrested. Under questioning, Tony King confessed to killing 2 innocent girls. After his arrest, he said he followed Rosio as she entered a busy street on her way home from her boyfriend's house and held a razor to her neck. When she tried to free herself from her attacker, the razor stabbed into Rosio's neck. The monster panicked and stabbed her 9 times. In 2005, King was sentenced to 36 years in prison for the kidnapping, violence, and murder of Sonia Carabantes. The court ordered him to pay the victim's family the equivalent of about $350,000. He also received an additional 7 years for attempted violence against a woman in Malaga in 2001. The following year, he was also found guilty of the murder of Rosio Waninkoff and received an additional 19-year sentence. Before his trial, King sent letters to Sonia and Rosio's mothers asking for forgiveness. He is currently serving his sentence at Herrera de la Mancha Maximum Security Prison in Ciudad Real in Spain. After the case was closed, a major scandal erupted in Spain over the fact that an innocent man was convicted of the murder of Rosio Waninkoff. We are accustomed to imagining that miscarriages of justice brought to light bring shame to those involved and monetary costs to the state. But this is not the case in Spain. It is difficult to accept and realize, but in the 21st century, not only police and courts can brutally punish an innocent person, but even society may well trample a man into the mud, and even if he manages to prove his case, absolutely no one will apologize. It took more than a year before it became clear that Dolores Vasquez was telling the truth when she dryly and unemotionally repeated that she was innocent. What all of Spain had taken for cruelty and insensitivity turned out to be simply the personality traits of a woman. In 2008, the Spanish Ministry of Justice offered Dolores Vasquez 120,000 euros in compensation, which was less than the 4 million euros that Dolores had originally demanded. But no one ever apologized to Dolores for the way she was treated. Dolores Vasquez, whose parents moved to Spain from Epsom, returned to the UK after she was released from prison. More than 20 years have passed, but Dolores has still not received an apology for the way she was treated, nor has she received any compensation since the case was closed. In 2014, she was working for a transport company in East London and underwent a psychological evaluation after her ordeal. She recently said she is still waiting for an apology after years of anxiety, when she found it difficult to talk to people and find work for the years of fear and humiliation she lived in. The Dolores Vasquez imprisonment case is considered one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in Spain's judicial history since 1910. Criminals easily get away with it, even if they are stupid enough to leave their DNA behind, simply because they cross the country's border. The police rush to pin the case on at least one person without going into detail. The press hypes up scandals and digs into the dirty laundry of not only the perpetrators, but also the victims. Society easily labels and considers it normal to put someone in jail just because they dislike that person. It is a pity that such truth is true for absolutely all countries of the world.
After Victor Alexander Pual committed the heinous crime, he carelessly went to the home of his girlfriend's father, Reina, ostensibly to retrieve forgotten children's clothes. There he took a tablet belonging to one of the victimized girls and pawned it at a nearby pawn shop, receiving about 500 pesos. The next day, he spent the equivalent of US $10 while vacationing on the beach with his best friend Crystal. During the outing, he confessed that he had done something bad to his lover, but without any specific details. Crystal later said that by Victor's tone, words, and expressions, she guessed the seriousness of what had happened. She even allegedly tried to visit the house, intending to see if Reina and her children were all right. However, Victor refused the visit, citing the disorder and difficult emotional atmosphere in the family. That was enough for the girl to decide that she had done the best she could in the situation. Crystal did not go to the police. Concerned neighbors contacted the police later when the smell of decomposition emanating from Reina and Victor's home became so strong that it could no longer be ignored or explained by rotting garbage or dead animals on the property. The pungent, nauseating odor was undoubtedly coming from the recently moved couple's home, where flies were congregating at the windows. Since Reina and Victor had only recently moved into the house and had not yet made friends with the neighbors, no one had their phone numbers or any other means of contacting the couple. Moreover, no one had seen Reina, Victor, or the children for several days. Due to the inability to contact the homeowners and the frightening smell, concerned neighbors called emergency services. A few hours after the call, law enforcement officers picked the door lock and entered the home. Inside, they were greeted by a truly horrifying sight: the 4 lifeless bodies of Reina and her children. Reina's daughters were found in a room next to their mother, and the son was found hanging from a rung in a closet. It's unclear how the press was immediately on the scene, but no sooner had the detectives established the identity of the man who lived with Reina and fined him, as a report with shocking details of the death of the family went live on one of the major metropolitan TV channels. So Victor Alexander Pual, while at work in his workshop, learned that the police had broken into his house and found the bodies of 4 victims. Realizing that he would soon be detained, he sent a message to the owner of the workshop. "I cut short the life of the love of my life. She loved me with all her soul, and I loved her too, a perfect love with no arguments." It's a very sad story. In messages to Miguel Ureña Marancini, he passed on the contacts of Reina's relatives, asking them to pass them on to the police. He explained that he only trusted Miguel, deeply regretted what had happened, and asked him to convey to the biker club his last wish. He would like to leave as a biker, with a large motorcycle escort at the funeral. The last message, after which Victor stopped replying to Miguel, read, "Now I don't believe anyone. Everyone wants to save me, but it's not going to happen. I'm leaving this damned world. I don't care what happens. I'm leaving. See you later." Miguel Ureña contacted the police, told them everything, and added that his friend had reportedly taken his own life. Law enforcement officers tracked the location of Victor's cell phone and went to the scene. Victor Alexander Pual did not do anything to himself. Moreover, he didn't even think about it. He didn't even feel remorse or guilt for what had happened. The man knew he would be caught, and in a sense planned his arrest to make it as safe for himself as possible. Gathering his backpack of essentials, he headed to a small park not far from the workshop. For a while, he sat pensively on the sidewalk next to the park. A passerby approached him and asked if he needed help. Shaking his head from side to side, he replied that he was fine, stood up, walked into the park, and lay down on the grass. In this position, looking serenely at the sky and putting his hands behind his head, Victor lay there for almost an hour. Around 8 a.m., A national police van arrived. The man did not move or resist arrest. The arrest took less than 5 minutes. Reina Isabel Encarnacion was born in 1985 in the Dominican Republic.
A few years after Reina was born, her parents decided to separate. Her father left the family, but continued to support his ex-wife and daughter. Later, Reina's mother met another man, and the girl had a stepfather, who essentially became another father to her. Reina developed a great bond with her mother's new husband and maintained a warm relationship with her biological father. Both men treated her with warmth and care. Reina grew up to be an inquisitive and active child. She loved learning and enjoyed going to school. Her father's house was nearby, and she often saw him. It seemed that this intelligent and cheerful girl had a great future ahead of her. After successfully completing school, Reina entered university and began her higher education in commercial law. At the same time, she applied to the Autonomous University of Santo Domingo with the dream of obtaining a second degree in medicine. But she was not accepted and had to postpone her dream until the following year. When Reina turned 20, she met a man much older than herself, Daniel Bowden. Despite the significant age difference, a romantic spark ignited between them. A few months into their relationship, Reina became pregnant and the couple married. As a result of this union, they had 3 children, Daniela, Aracmina, and Angela. Reina had to give up her dream of getting a second higher education. At first, Reina and Daniel's marriage seemed ideal, but over time, the age difference began to affect their relationship, leading to frequent quarrels. Daniel realized that the constant conflicts are harmful to their children, and after 8 years of life together, the couple decided to separate. A long legal battle ensued, primarily concerning child custody. Unable to reach an agreement on their own, family court specialists intervened. They decided to conduct a psychological evaluation to help the children formulate who they wanted to live with. The experts concluded that the father should be the guardian, taking into account his age, financial situation, and the opinion of the older children. However, the judge making the final decision ignored the experts' recommendations and awarded custody of the older children to Reina. The youngest daughter, Angela, was to be raised in the custody of one of Daniel's sisters. Tragically, this decision deprived the children of not only a future, but a life. The years that followed showed that the judge should have heeded the advice of experts. It turned out that Reina's struggle was more about alimony than the children. After gaining custody of the older children, she immediately handed them over to her mother, believing it to be the best solution for everyone. She then initiated a new legal dispute over alimony payments. Reina claimed that her ex-husband had not paid her any of the court-ordered amount. Daniel countered that he had fulfilled all obligations, although he couldn't provide proof, claiming the payments were made in cash. The legal battle lasted several months and concluded in the mother's favor, with Daniel making another alimony payment. Significantly, during the second legal proceeding, Reina's own mother testified in defense of her former son-in-law, Daniel. She believed that Daniel was an excellent and responsible father who deserved better treatment. She emphasized that he and her daughter had shared 8 beautiful years together, with Daniel being a good, responsible husband and father. It's not to say that Reina neglected her children entirely. She visited them almost daily at their grandmother's place and regularly took them to her home on weekends. The rest of the time, she lived life to the fullest, making up for lost youth. At one of the parties, she met her new love, Victor Alexander Puturale. It's hard to imagine what attracted the young woman to Victor. He was 2 years younger than Reina. On one hand, Victor made a striking first impression, a mystically minded young man with long black hair and glowing white contact lenses, a biker and metalhead. On the other hand, he was a dirty, unkempt, introverted, and insecure guy. These peculiarities didn't deter the girl. Soon, the love-struck couple moved in together. Reina's mother accepted Victor. The young man won her over with his affability and numerous tales of the difficult life situations he had endured. He often and in detail spoke about his challenging childhood when his mother left him under the care of a strict and harsh father.
Unfortunately, manipulating the maternal instinct did not alert the children's grandmother. On the contrary, it endeared her to the manipulator. Victor was born in 1987. He indeed spent his early years with his father. It is unknown whether he was cruel to him. Victor learned to adapt to circumstances, even if they were uncomfortable for him, and no one in his surroundings saw anything odd about him, except for his appearance. From childhood, Victor never got into conflicts. He excelled in school and graduated with honors. He couldn't attend university only because his parents couldn't afford it. Therefore, he started looking for work and soon got an internship in a motorcycle repair shop. Since then, motorcycles became his passion. Over time, Victor acquired a Harley-Davidson motorcycle and joined the subculture of motorcycle enthusiasts and fans. A quiet, law-abiding citizen with no history of even a parking ticket, Victor nevertheless scared those around him, always in black clothes, with eye makeup, painted nails, and often white contact lenses. Very rarely did his control slip, revealing the lurking monster. After the incident, a neighbor recalled how he accidentally saw Victor Puterillo when he caught a neighbor's chicken, slit its throat, and drank the hot blood directly from the bird's wound. Reina and Victor took the children on weekends and sometimes on weekdays. The grandparents were very happy to have a break from their 3 noisy and active grandchildren. They saw that their daughter's new partner was kind and attentive to the children. Reina never complained to her parents about Victor, and in general, they never seemed to quarrel, which pleased her parents very much. The only shadow over this idyllic scene was a disturbing piece of information they had accidentally learned. Victor had a 10-year-old daughter whose biological mother had obtained a restraining order forbidding Victor from approaching the girl. Reina's parents couldn't understand why the mother would do such a thing. Reina's stepfather even followed Victor around a few times, but found nothing unusual or incriminating. The young man did not drink alcohol, did not use illegal substances, and was either at home or at work repairing motorcycles. He was never rude to the children, even when left alone with them. In other words, despite suspicions, he seemed like a normal person. Reina's parents wrote off the restraining order as her birth mother's eccentricity and settled down. The tale ended when the aunt who had been caring for the youngest daughter, Angela, informed Reina that she could no longer care for the girl. Around the same time, Reina's mother began having health problems, and the grandchildren had to move from their grandmother's house to Reina and Victor's. Suddenly, all 5 of them found themselves in a small apartment. However, the circumstances were very favorable. Reina was offered a new job with a higher salary. The reunited family moved into a spacious rented house with several separate rooms. A happy family life began. A spacious house, loving partners, children with their mother. Isn't that a sign that everything was going well? Perhaps it was, but soon Reina lost her job and the family faced some financial difficulties. According to Victor's mother, she even had to provide financial assistance to the young couple, as there was not enough money even for food, not to mention rent. Meanwhile, Reina's mother never heard about the difficulties her daughter was facing. Reina only occasionally brought the children to her mother's house, asking her grandmother to feed them well, which her grandmother was happy to do. In addition to the financial problems, something strange and clearly unhealthy began to happen in the couple. Reina had never complained to anyone about anything, but their relationship was far from normal. Shortly before the terrible events, Victor appeared on the street with short-cropped hair. It turned out that the couple had had a serious fight the night before, and Reina had cut off his long black hair as revenge while he slept. Additionally, Victor admitted that Reina threatened to leave him with the kids if he didn't find a well-paying job within a month. On Saturday, February 3, 2018, Reina went to her mother's house to pick up the children, who had been staying with their grandmother since Thursday. Reina's mother did not notice anything unusual in her daughter's behavior. On the contrary, she was sociable and in a normal mood. They had time to chat over a cup of tea while the children packed their things. The next day, early Sunday morning, February 4th, the girl and her mother had a brief telephone conversation during which they discussed current affairs and agreed to call each other later. Reina never contacted again. After numerous attempts to call and many text messages sent to her daughter and grandchildren, the woman called Victor, but he didn't pick up either. So the silence and ignoring of calls stretched for several days. Finally, on Wednesday, February 7th, Victor answered. He assured that everything was in order and promised that Reina would call back soon and explain everything in detail. He asked her not to worry and to wait for the call. The daughter never called back. It became clear to the parents that something terrible had happened. A day later, they received a call from law enforcement officers, from whom Reina's parents learned the horrifying details of what had happened. After the arrest, Victor Alexander immediately began to testify. He did not hide anything and did not count on leniency. According to him, he really wanted to end his life, but then changed his mind, believing that he should pay for what he had done. Thanks to the detailed testimony, it was possible to almost completely restore the chronology of events. On the morning of Sunday, February 4th, the roommates had another big fight in their shared bedroom. Victor struck Reina several blows on her neck, chest, and stomach, as a result of which she died. He then left her body locked in the room and sent Daniela, Reina's oldest child, to the store, asking her to buy him a pack of cigarettes. While the girl was gone, Victor went to the children's room and strangled Reina's daughter with a necktie while she slept. When Daniela returned from the store, he did the same thing to her as he had done to her sister. He then moved the children's bodies to the bedroom he shared with Reina. At that time, young Aramin was playing quietly in the small courtyard behind the house. Victor approached the boy and explained that his older sister had gone to the store and was too late, so he would take him to his aunt's house and then go look for Daniela. Aramin obediently went with Victor to the house of his aunt, Johanna Mendoza Coelho. Leaving the boy behind, the man returned to the house, intending to hide the consequences of his actions. It seems that it was only when he returned to the house that he realized that it was impossible to hide the truth, and it would inevitably be revealed. A few hours later, he returned for the boy and informed his aunt that Daniela had been found and it was time to go home. At home, Victor ended Aramin's life by hanging him from a rung inside a closet. The man claimed that he committed this crime because of the difficult financial situation they were all in, which he was psychologically unable to cope with. Victor's acquaintances confirmed that he had recently complained about family disagreements over money. Victor's mother told investigators that it was financial difficulties that had driven her son to a state of despair and forced him to commit such a grave act. The couple was already in a critical state, and their situation was exacerbated over the weekend when they did not receive their expected paycheck. I believe that it was this situation of my son, who was still a young man, being demanded money from a woman and her children, that pushed him to the edge, said Mrs. Joanna Mendoza, aunt of the accused. However, the extreme brutality of the crime was not consistent with a state of mental illness. The preliminary autopsy report clarified the situation, showing that all the female victims were not only deprived of their lives, but also abused. An investigation by the public prosecutor's office revealed that the victim, Reina Isabel Encarnacion, had repeatedly expressed concerns in correspondence with the accused on WhatsApp about the inappropriateness of intimate acts towards Angela while she was asleep. In one of the latest messages, the woman threatened her cohabitant that she would go to the police. Reina's mother told the police that the detained young man had always treated the three girls very well, but he had a special relationship with Angela. He carried her in his arms, often put her on his lap, hugged and kissed her. He even came up with a special nickname for her, Señorita. Investigators assumed that Victor had ended the lives of the family members not because of financial problems, but to cover up the wrongful acts committed against Angela. Forensic results confirmed that Reina, as well as the two girls, had been wrongfully abused. However, the experts could not determine whether the wrongful acts were committed before or after taking their lives, as the bodies were found at a late stage of decomposition. A psychiatric examination showed that Victor suffers from antisocial personality disorder, meaning he lacks both guilt and conscience. The heinous crime outraged and shocked the entire Dominican society. The trial began in January 2019 and was completed in just 2 days. Testimony was given by experts and forensic experts, investigators, and various witnesses. Especially a lot of information was obtained from Victor's friends. For example, Crystal, the defendant's best friend, said that on the day of his arrest, he gave her all of his social media passwords and his mother's phone number. According to her, it seemed that the young man was planning to leave his life. Another friend of the young man said that Victor confessed the crime to him in detail a few days before his arrest. but the confession was so horrifying that the friend took it as a joke. In general, everyone who had ever seen or met the accused was shocked by his act. Neighbors, teachers, co-workers, they always saw him as a quiet guy with a distinctive appearance and nothing more. He didn't seem confrontational, wasn't known as a brawler, and, according to them, never spoke ill of others. He just wasn't very social. Victor's only diagnosis as a child was attention deficit disorder, but according to his mother, the condition didn't cause any problems for the family or himself. Some 18 witnesses, including 2 forensic experts, testified at the trial. The latter provided such shocking details that even Victor's mother asked for the full weight of the law to fall on her son. Justice must be served, he must pay for everything he has done, she said in court. She begged Reina's family to forgive her for having such a son and shared their grief. Victor Alexander Pual pleaded guilty in court to taking the lives of Reina Isabel Encarnacion and her 3 children. He also apologized to the victim's family and the public for the crime. I accept the facts, and not everything that was said happened exactly as described. I realize that I cannot turn back time and bring back the lives I took. I apologize to the community and all family members for what happened. I contributed to my arrest because I realized that by ending my life, I would not be able to pay for my actions, Victor Pual calmly stated. The man received the most severe sentence then available in the Dominican Republic's judicial system, 30 years. At the time the sentence was pronounced, he was just 30 years old, meaning that under fortunate circumstances, he could leave prison and live the rest of his life in freedom. This possibility seriously urged the National Congress to expedite updates to the criminal code. The country's code, adopted in 1844, does not include cumulative punishment for multiple crimes. Had the updated criminal code, currently under consideration in the National Congress, been in effect, Victor Alexander would have faced a sentence of up to 60 years for his crime. The life-taking of Reina and her children drew attention to the urgency of replacing the code as soon as possible. Nevertheless, it can be said that justice prevailed. The perpetrator received the maximum sentence. At least Reina's mother, speaking on various television programs, stated that she was satisfied with the outcome of the case. The biological father of the 3 children who were taken cannot yet accept what happened. He stated that the tragedy with his children would not have occurred if the judge had listened to the experts and granted him custody. The case of Nobuyuki Sato, a schoolgirl in the house as a pet. To realize that the perpetrator is a maniac is possible by the nature of his actions. As a rule, maniacs abuse, torture, and then brutally take the lives of their victims, but sometimes such abuse lasts for years or even decades. If the account of a maniac has more than 2 victims, criminalists call it a series, and the criminal himself, a serial maniac. The history of world criminalistics knows a lot of cases when maniacs did not kill their victims, but held them captive in their own homes, basements, or specially created bunkers. It is enough to remember Natasha Kampusch or Elizabeth Fritzl, who was kept by her own father in the basement of their own house for 24 years. Alas, there are many such stories, and what is most curious is that in most cases the hostages were, one might say, in full view of everyone, and the kidnappers had previously come to the attention of the police. The name of our heroine today is Fusako Sano, and she has been held captive for almost 10 years in a room whose door was never locked. One might assume that it was her story that inspired Natasha Kampusch's kidnapper, but by the time the Japanese girl's tragedy became public, the Austrian schoolgirl Natasha had already been living in captivity for a 2nd year. But let's break down this tangled case full of drama known as the Nigata girl captivity incident from the start. Victim, Fusako Sano. A girl named Fusako Sano, later changed her name to Sachiko Yamada, was born in the small Japanese town of Mitsuke, located in Niigata Prefecture in 1980, on November 28th. She grew up in an ordinary family of average income, was a welcome and favorite child. The girl attended one of the local schools, was fond of baseball, and cheered for the local team. On November 13th, 1990, 2 weeks before her 10th birthday, Fusako, who was in the 4th grade at the time, was coming home from school. She was a little late because she had stayed to watch the school baseball game. Her parents were aware of the sporting event so they were not particularly concerned. When the schoolgirl walked home on her usual route, it was already getting dark. On a cold autumn evening, there were almost no passers-by on the street, and rare cars were passing quickly, disappearing from sight. Suddenly, one car overtook the girl and then braked sharply and swerved in front of her. The loud squeal of brakes divided young Sano's life into before and after. Kidnapper Nobuyuki Sato. Nobuyuki Sato was born in 1962, July 15th, in the Japanese prefecture of Niigata in a wealthy family. The head of the family had its own successful business related to passenger transportation. The boy was a late child of his parents, and at the time of his birth, his father was 62 years old, and his mother was 37 years old. Nobuyuki had 5 siblings from his father's previous marriage, but he had no ties to them. The boy grew up a capricious and very spoiled child, for whom there were no inhibitions. At the same time, he was very emotional and sometimes even aggressive. If his demands were not met immediately, he could throw a tantrum, and once he threw himself at his mother with fists right in the store when she did not buy him another toy. At school, Nobuyuki had almost no friends because of his complex character, strange and sometimes inadequate behavior. It is worth noting that the boy was quite tall, which he was very embarrassed of, and all the time slouched a lot, so he received a lot of offensive nicknames. On one of the central streets of the city, the head of the family built a luxurious 2-story house in European style, where on the second floor most of the part was occupied by a spacious and bright children's room for his favorite son. However, the boy did not like the room. He behaved restlessly and kept repeating that he was afraid to be there alone. Such anxious behavior and unreasonable fears became the reason to show the child to a doctor. After an initial medical examination at a regular hospital, the boy was referred to a psychiatrist for evaluation. There he was diagnosed with several disorders, including nyctophobia, fear of the dark, misophonia, fear of germs and dirt. In addition, the boy was found to have a strange combination of autophobia, fear of loneliness, and sociophobia, anxiety disorder related to social interaction. That is, he was equally afraid of and avoided both loneliness and contact with others. Nobuyuki always remained a loner. He had neither a girlfriend, despite his rather attractive appearance, nor friends. In high school, he actually became an outcast, and peers simply did not want to communicate with him. He could vent his anger, dissatisfaction with himself and others only on his own elderly parents, who forgave him everything and tried in every possible way to placate his son with gifts or money. As an adult, Sato did not stay at any job. He constantly got into trouble, conflicted with colleagues, and neglected his direct duties, because of which no one wanted to do business with him. The young man could go home in the middle of the workday just because it rained, and he felt sad about it. And once he intentionally injured a female coworker. He probably felt some kind of sympathy for her and was trying to get her attention. The incident was written off as an accident, but Sato was immediately fired. After that, he did not work anywhere else and lived on his parents' money. Gradually, the young man began to leave his room less and less often, and more often conflicts with his parents. After another such quarrel, the young man set a fire in his own home, which almost destroyed the entire house and its inhabitants. Then Sato was sent for compulsory treatment in the psychiatric clinic, where he was diagnosed with manic depressive disorder, outbursts of uncontrolled aggression, as well as signs of misogyny, acute dislike and hatred of female representatives of the female sex. He stayed in the hospital for a little over a month, after which he was discharged, having been deemed to pose no threat to others. For a while, Nobuyuki was relatively calm, and even started to rebuild the partially burned house and added a couple more rooms to it. But his efforts did not last long, and he simply abandoned the construction. The first attempted kidnapping and arrest. Sato became increasingly unsociable, sullen, and spent most of his time in his room watching TV. It should be noted that over time he stopped letting his mother and father not only into his room, but also, in principle, to the second floor. In case of violation of this boundary, he would pounce on his elderly parents with fists, shouting and threatening them with death. In the spring of 1989, Nobuyuki began to go for walks. but he preferred to walk near one of the local schools, where he closely watched the girls. At first he behaved with restraint, did not approach, and did not try to make contact with anyone. But one day he grabbed one of the girls right at the school gate, threw her over his shoulder, and ran to his car, which he parked nearby. All this happened in front of the other children, who immediately shouted and called for help. A school security guard and a few bystanders reacted quickly and rescued the girl and detained the kidnapper before the police arrived. The girl Sato tried to kidnap was barely 9 years old. He could not explain why he had attacked the schoolgirl, so the only logical conclusion was that Sato was charged with attempting to commit unlawful acts of violence against a minor. He faced a serious prison sentence, but at his trial, which took place in August of the same year, Nobuyuki was given only a year's probation. According to some reports, his father helped him to do this by using his connections and paying a lot of money. Moreover, soon Nobuyuki's name mysteriously disappeared from the database of criminals who were prosecuted. Here, apparently, also did not do without the efforts of his father, except that the elderly man, so zealously trying to clean up the reputation of the heir, himself went to the hospital with a heart attack and died. Sato Sr. felt an acute sense of shame and pain for the monster he had raised. The kidnapping of a girl in Nigata.
A year and a half after the first failed kidnapping attempt, the 28-year-old went on the hunt again. All this time, he behaved relatively calmly, did not get in the sight of the police, and the incident that occurred in the spring of 1989 near the school, safely all forgotten. On November 13th, 1990, Nobuyuki left home, got into a car, and for several hours just drove around the city. In the evening, when it was starting to get dark, he drove to a deserted road, where he soon saw a girl coming home from school. It was 9-year-old Fusako Sano, who had, to her misfortune, been delayed at a sporting event that day. There were no people or other cars nearby, no one to call for help or police. Sato braked sharply and swerved to the curb right in front of the girl. He got out of the car, knife in hand, grabbed Fusako and threatened if she tried to scream or run away, he would slit her throat. He then shoved Fusako Sano into the trunk, and after driving down the road some more, he turned onto a vacant lot. There, Nobuyuki opened the trunk again, tied the girl's hands and feet, and taped her mouth shut. When it got dark, the kidnapper drove to his house, took the captive out of the trunk, and carried her to his room, entering through an unfinished part of the dwelling to remain undetected. Then he also went back out, and entered already through the door, as he always did. Nobuyuki went upstairs, and again threatening her with the knife, ordered Fusako to be quiet. He then tied her to the bed and told her that if she tried to leave the room or even look out the window, scream or cry, he would kill her and throw her body into the ocean so that no one would ever find it. The schoolgirl was scared to death and did everything the kidnapper said, still hoping that he would take pity and let her go. The search for the missing girl. When Fusako didn't come home from school, her parents began to worry. They knew her daughter would stay late after school to watch a baseball game, but it was getting dark outside, and she should have been home a long time ago. At first, the Sano couple tried to find their daughter on their own, following her usual route from home to school, but their efforts were unsuccessful. Closer to night, the parents of the schoolgirl appealed to the police, hoping that the girl will be found quickly, because from the moment of her disappearance has passed only a few hours. Police squads began the search, and by morning they were joined by dozens of volunteers from among local residents. The next day, more than 200 people took part in the search operation, combing the area, pasting flyers with photos of the missing girl and interviewing passers-by in search of random witnesses. Notably, Nobuyuki lived very close to the girl's school and near the police station. Moreover, he had previously come to the attention of the police for attempting to kidnap the girl. But despite all this, Nobuyuki was not even a suspect in the case, thanks to the efforts of his late father, who made sure that his son's name did not appear in the criminal database. The massive search lasted for many months, checking numerous empty buildings, structures, trailers, and railroad cars, searching suspicious vehicles, combing vacant lots and interstate highways. But despite all the efforts, no traces or clues to the schoolgirl's whereabouts were found. The most different, even unlikely versions were being worked out, among which there was a suggestion that representatives of North Korean special services were involved in the abduction of the Japanese girl. However, as time went on, the search was not successful, and Fusako Sano was still considered missing, captured by a maniac. As Fusako herself later admitted, she was scared to death at first and did everything her captor told her, hoping that in time he would take pity on her and let her go. But Nobuyuki didn't even think of letting his captive go. For the first few months, he bound her hands and feet tightly, so tightly that the blood flow was impaired, causing her to lose some sensation in her limbs. In case of the slightest disobedience or violation of silence, the torturer used a stun gun as punishment, beat Fusako on the head and body with his fists, or threatened her with a knife. At the same time, Nobuyuki never once took advantage of his victim in an intimate way during his imprisonment.
He was not attracted to her as a woman, but rather something between a living toy and a pet to talk to. Nobuyuki Sato fed the prisoner once or twice a day with food prepared by his mother, who lived on the first floor. Because of this meager diet, the girl was weakened and severely malnourished. He forbade her to get out of bed, and she had to go to the bathroom in plastic bags, which the man then took to the unfinished part of the house. Once a month, he bathed Fusako in a basin, cut her hair and nails himself, and dressed her in his own shabby clothes. But even if she behaved quietly and did not break the kidnapper's rules, he still beat her regularly for fun and practiced various fighting techniques on her. After a few years, Fusako was finally broken psychologically, complied with all the demands of her tormentor, and did not even try to run or look out the window. Sato stopped tying her up when he went somewhere else and didn't even lock the door of his room. He simply made the bed with the prisoner lying there and threw a couple of blankets or towels on top, so that at first glance it looked like there was nothing underneath. As time went on, Nobuyuki began to turn on Fusako's radio periodically and allowed her to watch television with him. However, they watched only scotchki or some sports matches, something that was interesting to Nobuyuki himself. He also brought her comic books, which he adored. It was the only thing Fusako had read in her years of confinement. For almost 10 years, she had seen no other people but her captor, had never spoken to anyone, and had never left the confines of her room. In fact, she was on the bed all the time, and hardly moved at all. The girl was so resigned to her fate that she did not even try to resist, escape, or make herself known. Mother abuse and police indifference. Nobuyuki's mother lived on the first floor of the house and for years had not entered her son's room because he threatened to beat her if she broke the ban. The woman knew her spoiled and violent son all too well, so she followed his rules. After Nobuyuki put a prisoner in the room, he forbade the mother to even go up to the second floor, and when she once tried to do so, he simply pushed the elderly mother down the stairs. She worked as much as she could and tried to stay home as little as possible. But when she retired in 1996, at the age of 73, her life became simply unbearable. Her son regularly abused his mother, beat her, and forced her to follow a series of rules he had invented. Finally, the elderly woman could not stand it, and in the spring of 1996 went to the police, where she wrote a statement that she was a victim of domestic violence by her own son. But the police, apparently, did not want to deal with the case, and therefore persuaded Mrs. Sato to withdraw her statement and independently deal with the family problems. The pensioner also twice applied for consultation to the public health center, where she complained about her son's inadequate and aggressive behavior and asked to hospitalize him in a psychiatric hospital. But even here, she was refused, considering such a reason not serious enough and advising her to persuade her son to go to the clinic for help himself. Almost 4 years later, in January 2000, the exhausted elderly woman, after another beating, called the hospital and asked for a medical team to be sent to her house, as well as representatives of law enforcement, because her son was holding her tied up and had tasered her several times. An unexpected discovery. This time, the officials finally responded to the pensioner's complaints and went to the address. When the ambulance and police car arrived at the house, Nobuyuki became visibly nervous. He began to behave aggressively, resisted, and tried to fight. Because of this inappropriate behavior, He had to be handcuffed, and the medics injected him with a large dose of sedatives. The beaten elderly woman admitted that she was afraid of her son, whose behavior was becoming more and more aggressive and uncontrollable. She also said that she had not gone up to the second floor of the house for many years because the air forbade her to do so, threatening to kill her. The police officers decided to check the second floor and Nobuyuki's room. As soon as they entered, they noticed a pile of blankets lying on the bed, which suddenly moved slightly. Pulling back the blankets, the police officers were dumbfounded to see a very thin, pale, and exhausted girl underneath them. When they asked her who she was and how she came to be here, she very quietly gave her name and said that she had been kidnapped on her way home from school a long time ago. After the gruesome discovery, Nobuyuki's mother was brought into the room and asked her if she knew the girl, but the woman was very surprised and claimed that she had no idea that anyone other than her and her son lived in their house. The captive also confirmed that she had never seen the woman before. Confessions of a maniac. The same day, Nobuyuki was brought to the station for questioning, and what he told literally shocked the police officers. He remembered in detail the day he was driving along the road and saw Fusako. According to the detainee, he thought the girl was very cute and wanted to take her home with him. Sato claimed that he took care of her. He fed her, washed her, dressed her, and read her comic books, and punished her only for disobedience. He also admitted that he loved his captive as a friend, and she seemed to love him too. He had no intention of ever letting her go, and hoped she would stay with him for life. He loved spending time with her. He could talk to the girl for hours about skaks, soccer, music, or his favorite comic book characters, and she would listen silently. He added that he never locked his bedroom door, but Fusako never tried to escape, which he concluded meant she liked living with him. Consequences, trial, and sentence. After a medical examination, the doctors concluded that, despite his mental disorder, Sato was able to recognize his actions and could therefore stand trial. His mother could be involved as an accomplice because the elderly woman, at the request of her son, regularly bought feminine hygiene products in the supermarket and could suspect something wrong. But it was taken into account the fact that she repeatedly contacted the police and medical institutions, but her requests to visit the family home were ignored. The case was widely publicized even before the trial began, and the city police were strongly criticized because Nobuyuki had been previously prosecuted for attempted kidnapping of a schoolgirl, but when he brought his plan to the end, he remained above suspicion. As a result, the local police chief and the head of the regional police department, who failed to control the situation from the beginning and made a lot of mistakes, were removed from their posts. Nobuyuki Sato was brought to trial in May 2000. All his actions, and even the smallest offenses, were studied in detail and attached to the case because the prosecutors tried to achieve for the kidnapper of the maximum possible punishment. As a result, Sato was found guilty and sentenced to 14 years in prison. Such a term was considered the maximum. He was released in the spring of 2015. By that time, his mother had long died in a home for the elderly, and Nobuyuki had no other relatives. He himself was found dead a year and a half later in early 2017 in a small rented room. The cause of his death was not disclosed. How did the girl's life turn out? At the time of her discovery, Fusako was so weak that she could barely stand on her feet. Doctors diagnosed her with exhaustion and dehydration, and her muscles were practically atrophied, in addition to stuttering, frightened of sunlight, and practically lost her communication skills. When her parents saw their daughter for the first time after nearly a decade apart, they didn't even recognize her. It took the girl about a year to more or less recover physically, but her mental health took much longer to recover. Fusako Sano had severe post-traumatic stress disorder, shunned people, and her intelligence remained at the level of a 10-year-old child. Her parents took their daughter out of town. She changed her name to Sachiko Yamada and flatly refused to talk to the press. Over time, she made friends, took up photography, and even passed her driver's license test. Unfortunately, in 2007, she suffered another shock when her father drowned in front of her eyes during a family trip to a pond. On the morning of August 22, 2016, residents of the small Spanish town of Pobra do Caraminal, rushing to work, found flyers posted everywhere. Volunteers had tirelessly pasted them on every building. The pictures on the flyers showed a young 18-year-old Diana Maria Kerr Lopez Pinel. The young girl was of a very frail build at about 6 feet tall. Her black hair, brown eyes, and delicate appearance made her irresistible. The evening before she disappeared, she was wearing pink shorts, a t-shirt, a white sweatshirt, and black sneakers. The description said the girl left home the night before and suddenly disappeared. Since last night, her family, along with volunteers and special services, have been desperately and tirelessly searching for the missing girl in every possible way. They have scoured every street and explored every corner, hoping to find some trace and bring Diana home. Juan Carlos, Diana's father, was in Madrid, but wasted no time in contacting the police to trace the calls from his daughter's phone and find out the last location of her phone. He also contacted the local newspaper and urged residents to help with the search. If you have any information, even the smallest, contact the police. The police need your help, Diana's father reported. Diana's mother, on the verge of depression, pleaded with the public. "We are doing everything we can to find Diana, but we still haven't gotten any answers. If you have any information, please help us. We are in a situation where even the slightest rumor can become important and help us find our daughter." Diana Maria Kerr Lopez Pinel was born on August 12, 1998, in Madrid. She was the daughter of Diana Christina Lopez Pinel Pinarejo and Juan Carlo Kerr, and had a sister named Valeria. The family was quite wealthy and closely related. However, in 2013, Diana's parents divorced, which greatly affected the sisters. They faced depression, often conflicted over the attention of their mother, who took most of the care of them. Despite this, the father saw his daughters regularly. During vacations, Diana and her mother and sister often visited the small town of Pobra do Caraminal on the coast, with a population of about 10,000. In the summer of 2016, Diana's family spent their vacations as usual in the cozy town of Pobra do Caraminal. Every summer, they returned here to enjoy the silence and beauty of the place. Sunday, August 21st, promised to be just like all the other days. In the evening, around 10 o'clock, Diana went up to her mother and told her that she was going to go to Valle Inclán Park to meet her friends and have fun in honor of the Feast of the Virgin Carmen. Valle Inclán Park was not far from the cottage where the family was staying, and was a place where Diana often walked. Her mother, seeing nothing strange in it, allowed her to go there again. The girl spent that evening merrily among her friends. 4 hours later, Diana said goodbye to her friends and was about to return home, not realizing that this would be their last goodbye. On the way, she met her acquaintance Paseo de Ariel, not far from the very pizzeria where Diana often spent time. It was about 2:30 in the morning when they said goodbye. Paseo de Ariel was the last person to see Diana on that dark night. The morning of August 22nd, 2016 turned into a nightmare for Diana's mother, Maria Kerr Lopez Pinel. At 8:30 in the morning, she realized that something was wrong with her daughter. The girl hadn't come home from the party. Her cell phone was off or out of range, and this caused alarm. The mother decided not to wait and immediately called the police, reporting her daughter missing. Based on the information from the mother, it could be concluded that Diane did not have any serious emotional or mental health issues, despite a troubled childhood due to her parents' divorce. Her prolonged absence was very strange and raised serious concerns. Police began to unravel the tangle of incomprehensible events surrounding the disappearance of Diana Maria Kerr Lopez Pinel, and investigators had to find out what happened when Diana disappeared without a trace. It turned out that Diana's last messages were sent to a friend of hers from Madrid via WhatsApp. In them, she wrote about a certain stranger who was stalking her and shouting strange phrases, scaring the girl.
These messages were Diana's last contact with the outside world, as she no longer responded to the messages, although they were read. The next day, the police began to retrace the route Diana had to take to get home. It was there, along the road, that they found a black hairband that looked very much like the one Diana had been wearing that night. It was the only thing that was found at the scene of the disappearance. But other than that, investigators had no other evidence. Diana's friends were unable to provide any useful information, and there were no CCTV cameras on the last stretch of Diana's journey. The street was poorly lit and sparsely populated, with only a few garages and a dilapidated Boomerang nightclub along the road. Some witnesses claimed to have seen Diana get out of a car with 3 guys in it. Allegedly, she moved to another car, which took her away from the port, but these testimonies were not confirmed. Investigators considered 2 main versions of what happened. The first one suggested that Diana was kidnapped by someone she might have known. The second version linked the disappearance to a possible attack by a maniac. Diana's mother even suggested a third version, that her daughter could have been taken away on a boat. Diana's friend and ex-boyfriend reported that she met a guy from Morocco, and together they bought hashish. But this information only complicated the picture of the disappearance. An important point was the information in the media about the discovery of the clothes that Diana wore that evening. However, Diana's mother denied this information, claiming that no clothes were found. In addition, her credit card and identification were left in the house. Diana could not just run away, leaving all her belongings and documents behind. This fact and other circumstances confirmed that the girl's disappearance was not of her own free will. Nevertheless, the case still remained mysterious and could not be solved. Shortly after Diana's disappearance, the press reported on the quarrel that broke out between Diana and her mother just a few days before the tragic event. The media claimed that Diana had suffered a nervous breakdown that required medical attention, and that her younger sister, Valeria, had also been hospitalized with the same symptoms. To prevent further litigation and conflict, custody rights to the younger sister were transferred to the father on Thursday, September 1st. This was a preventative measure to avert further strife in the local community, which was already gripped by an unsettling atmosphere over Diana's disappearance. The father and his daughter left town, and rumors began to spread that the family was hiding something important. According to Diana's friends, running away from home was commonplace for the sisters, especially for her younger sister, Valeria, who was only 16 years old. Relationships in the family were complicated, and quarrels between mother and daughters were not uncommon. This information became available to the public, and the question immediately arose, why was the mother so anxious when Diana did not return home, if the girl had previously often left home? On Wednesday, August 31st, Diana's parents did not show up for a scheduled press interview where they were scheduled to give details of the investigation. The family lawyer explained that the parents were emotionally crushed at the thought that they might never see their daughter again. The newspaper El Mundo published an article on September 11 that shed light on other aspects of the family's life. It said that the mother's words that Diana did not have mental problems were contradicted by information about her April disappearance. At the time, Diane left home for 3 days and her mother did not contact police. The girl would turn off her phone to anger her mother and said she no longer wanted to live with her. Letters written by Diana and Valeria to each other also appeared in the press. From them, it became clear that both sisters were going through serious emotional problems. Valeria has even been hospitalized several times over the past year, once having to have her stomach pumped due to an overdose of prescription drugs. In the absence of progress in the investigation into Diana's disappearance, prosecutors have launched an investigation into the abuse of the Lopez Pinel family's youngest daughter, Valeria. The investigation into Diana Care's disappearance continued to be intense and progressed at full speed. Forensic experts seized a number of items belonging to the girl, including a toothbrush, a comb, a personal computer, her diary, and some prescription drugs. These items were subjected to a thorough analysis. Investigators then began questioning Diana's acquaintances, including a young Moroccan man with whom Diana had a brief affair. All of these measures failed to yield the desired results, and further police searches remained unsuccessful. The police conducted extensive searches in the mountains, forests, rivers, and lakes near the site of the disappearance. However, it appears that Diana disappeared around 3 a.m., and the last signal from her phone was found in the Tarragona area, 13 miles from where the family was staying. 72 days after her disappearance, Diana Kerr's case remained a mystery. None of the investigators' leads have yet been confirmed. In addition to a hairband, police found a cell phone that matched the description of Diana's phone. Her father confirmed that it was his daughter's cell phone. 2 months after her disappearance, Diana's Facebook profile was suddenly activated. Friends and relatives immediately notified the police and provided screenshots. It turned out that the Remind Password function had been used to avoid entering profile login details. This left 2 theories. Either Diana had forgotten her password, or the attacker was trying to gain access to her profile. Diana's phone was a key element in the case, however, it was never able to shed any light on the mysterious disappearance. On November 10, 2016, the driver of the very car in which Diana was allegedly last seen was finally identified. The man had previously been detained on charges of human trafficking. Information about his involvement in Diana's disappearance was kept secret for a long time so as not to disrupt the investigation. His wife claimed that he was with her that night, which excluded him from the list of suspects. However, on December 25, 2017, an incident occurred that became a key point in the investigation. One of the girls was attacked by a man, demanding her phone and threatening her with a weapon. The terrified victim screamed, and a couple passing by came to her aid. They rescued the girl from the thug who tried to pull her into a car. The shaken victim immediately contacted police, providing a description of the perpetrator and his license plate number. The next morning, police arrested 41-year-old Jose Enrique Abingay, who was also known as El Chico. The man already had a criminal past. The police immediately found out Jose Enrique turned out to be the same driver detained in 2016 on suspicion of kidnapping Diana Kerr. However, he was then released because they believed the alibi provided by his wife. The police again questioned the suspect and his wife. As a result of the interrogation, the wife admitted that she had previously lied, and in fact, on the night of Diana's disappearance, her husband was out of the house and did not return until 4 a.m.
Jose Enrique was eventually forced to admit that he accidentally hit Diana on the road and then was afraid to go to the police. That is why he decided to dispose of the body. However, he later changed his version of events, confessing to kidnapping and killing Diana. According to him, he came to the seashore to pick up gasoline from abandoned cars, and it was there that he saw Diana. Jose kidnapped her, tried to force her to have sexual intercourse, and then strangled her. This shocking truth brought new details to the case and confirmed that Diana Kerr's disappearance was the result of a gruesome crime. The disappearance of Diana Kerr Lopez Pinel was a long and harrowing experience for her family and everyone who followed the case. Nearly 500 days of investigation and constant media speculation only added to the pain of her loved ones. The accusations directed at Diana's parents only served to confuse and hinder the investigation. Despite this, through persistent investigation and the testimony of a second victim, investigators were able to gather the necessary evidence and find the perpetrator. Diana will be remembered by her loved ones as a bright and vivacious young woman who was unlucky enough to find herself in the path of a violent criminal. Her story serves as a reminder of how important it is to unite in the difficult moments of fighting crime to end impunity and ensure the safety of all citizens. Unfortunately, The perpetrator did not admit for a long time where he hid Diana's body, but later, family and friends managed to say goodbye to Diana and give her a proper burial. The body was found in the well of an abandoned warehouse. In January 2018, Jose was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 35 years.